Hello there. Today I'm bringing together some of my previous adventures from Rimworld. These stories blend the 100-day challenge format with deep character building, hopefully providing a more immersive experience. One survivor is stranded at sea, another deep underground, and the last one is lost in the vast, empty desert. Do they have what it takes to overcome nature itself? I completed these months ago, but it only felt right to bring them together in one video. Plus, to be completely honest, I need a little more time to finish up the Florida series. I've edited certain parts, enhanced the audio, and added some fun little segues between the videos. Lastly, if you'd like to support the channel, consider becoming a member or joining the Patreon. You can learn more about the rewards in the first segue. With that said, get your bug out bag ready. It's time to survive. If a brutal storm had wiped out your entire tribe, and you woke up naked and adrift in the middle of the ocean, what would you do? In this Rimworld challenge, I'm attempting to survive at least 100 days on a raft, surrounded by nothing more than water and wreckage. I'm only allowed to expand by using pontoon bridges, and I can't create any land except for chinapas. I haven't seen any challenges quite like this one, so let me know if you've tried it, and how it worked out for you. Now let's dive into a new adventure. Day 1. I awoke as Low Tide, a proud warrior of the Seahorse tribe. No, I didn't mean to make it rhyme. Islands of flotsam drifted all around us, the shattered remnants of my tribe's fleet. My memory of last night was just as foggy as the current weather. I remembered calm seas and merriment as we were celebrating the chieftain's birthday. But then, there was a roar of thunder and monstrous waves. A tremendous storm had descended upon us. The rest of my memories were washed away. Either way, none of it mattered now. The ocean would not feel sorry for me, so why should I pity myself? The Seahorse tribe has a saying, idle fish are easily speared, and Low Tide wouldn't be caught today. Based on the sun's positioning, it would be dark soon, so I set him off to gather what little supplies he could, and considered our predicament. The raft was wedged into a submerged sandbar. This alone wasn't so bad, but the foundation was heavily damaged, and the sail was torn to shreds. There was a small area of shallow water around the boat which I can navigate freely. However, the undercurrent of the deeper ocean was too powerful to swim across, even though the surface seemed calm. The good news was, I was alive. The sea gods had spared me, though whether that was a blessing or a curse, only time would tell. I also had some supplies which were nailed down to my raft at the start of the voyage. These supplies were a good start, but there were other useful items just outside of our reach. To the east, there was a neighboring sandbar littered with chunks of coral, and a few more supplies, including some pemmican. Unfortunately, a small stretch of deep water separated us from the potential meal. As luck would have it, Low Tide was somewhat of a construction worker himself, and possessed the construction skills to make pontoon bridges, or as I'm going to call them, raft bridges. I gathered the required materials and assembled them atop the waves. Even with his decent construction skill, it took Low Tide about an in-game hour to create each section. My work carried me into the night, and I retreated to the safety of my raft. As much as I needed it, I was hesitant to let myself rest, for I could feel my internal sea beginning to swell. I planned out some fishing areas to occupy my mind. One area would be for small fish, another for medium, and a third for large. As the night grew darker, I spotted a few glimmers of light hidden amidst the fog, like dying stars fading into nothingness. With that, I crawled into bed and waited for sleep to find me. The morning had arrived. My eyes were heavy from the lack of sleep, but the rest of my body was driven by hunger. I toiled away for hours until the raft bridge was completed and eagerly made my way across. Most of the pemmican was edible, though the bottom portion was too tainted by the salt water to be eaten. It would suffice for now. Wreckage was scattered in every direction, some more intact than others. The largest of these boat islands was to the southwest, where my tribe's flagship, the Sea Dancer, lay in a watery tomb. I then spotted the bodies of a few of my kinfolk. For a moment, I felt jealous of them, as if they embarked on a new voyage without me. But maybe their spirits were looking at me with the same type of envy. I nodded my head towards each of them in respect and got back to work. When you're in a survival situation, you need to get creative. Something you would normally consider useless might be the very thing that saves your life. For example, the remains of a tattered sail. Though it will never again function as intended, I could repurpose the cloth into makeshift tribal wear. This light garb will reduce the impact of the oppressive heat without slowing us down. On day 3, I ordered the dismantling of the flotsam sprawled across our sandbar and deconstructed the raft bridges. It pained me to take them apart, but I needed the materials in order to build towards the other islands. Dismantling the bridges had the unintended side effect of dredging up the sand between the 2 bars. I knew it wouldn't be long before the sea reclaimed it, but for now, we'll let low tide enjoy it. A wise man once said, "Give a man a fish, and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, and he'll catch a whole lot of fish." However, these fish are more than just a food source. They serve as attractive bait for larger creatures that dwell around me. It didn't take long to lure in the first potential meal. A green eel had begun gorging itself on the anglerfish bait I had set in the water. This species wasn't as formidable as its larger cousin, the moray eel, but they still possessed razor-sharp teeth, so we needed to be careful. Despite my cautious approach, the nimble creature landed a bite on our torso just as I impaled it with my spear. It was a small price to pay for such a big meal. I created another storage pile next to my fish lure pile. This one was for unwanted items that I couldn't afford to store on my raft. That was where all the terrible stuff went, and each one of them deserved it. That night I saw a man walking along one of the distant sandbars. Tom Guzman. He looks like a Tom Guzman. He didn't seem to notice us, or if he did, he didn't care to let us know. In fairness, from his perspective, all the flotsam must seem like a confusing mass of debris. Perhaps he was part of a rescue team looking for survivors. Or maybe they were lost at sea as well, like us. The man disappeared as the darkness grew thicker around us. There was no torchlight or any other indication that they were still there, and maybe they never were. I began another expansion, this time to the west, where an archipelago of wreckage floated close by. At some point, I managed to hunt down a second eel and added it to my resource pile. Unlike those that I would get through fishing, these larger creatures possessed more delicate meat, and their bones and skins made for a useful crafting material. As Ian Malcolm once said, life finds a way. Somehow, an anima tree had taken root in the soft sand nearby. I don't know how it got there, but the sight of the glowing little sapling lifted my spirits greatly. Later on in the day, I was attacked by a maddened blue sea snail. A few stabs of my spear felled the beast, but not before it inflicted painful injuries to my leg. On day 5, I completed the first section of the western bridge. This gave me access to 69 bison wool. It's just a coincidence. Get your mind out of the gutter. My good fortune soon turned downward as a foggy rain rolled in. Within minutes, I could see the soft sand that connected the bars beginning to wash away. I hurriedly gathered the chunks of coral from them and stored them near our raft for future use. The foggy rain continued its deluge throughout the night and into the following morning. The dredged up sand had been washed away, and along with it, the anima sapling. The ocean was a cruel and unforgiving place, and the loss of such a wondrous tree was a sharp reminder of that. Work continued on the western bridge until I reached the next section of flotsam. This portion contained some damp cloth. It wasn't strong enough to make a sail with, but it would be useful in constructing more raft bridges. I now had to make a choice of where to go next. My long-term goal was to push west until I reached the flagship, but I currently lack the materials to do so. For now, I would need to move in another direction, but which one? Over the next few days, I deconstructed portions of the western bridge and organized my supplies and storage. Between construction projects, I played horseshoes and fished. The sea was bountiful, and thanks to the encompassing wreckage, it offered more than just food. Sometimes I would catch things like throwing rocks and planks, but other times I would catch interesting items, like vodka. Finally, after a great deal of deliberation, I decided to push north. There were some good resources to be had up there, including a fishing trap and a garden bed that I can utilize for a variety of plants. Like a predator ambushing its prey, a powerful storm had descended upon me out of nowhere. The brewing storm brought about chaotic glimpses of my tribe's fleet. Every crack of thunder was paired with faint images of boats being smashed under monstrous waves. I tried forcing the images and shouts from my mind, but it didn't work. Against my better judgment, I threw myself into the shallow water and swam for the northern bridge. It rocked mightily above the angry waves, but the integrity of the structure remained intact. It was a death wish to work in such conditions, but I needed to prove to the sea gods that I was a true warrior, and more importantly, prove to myself that I could overcome this test. I worked feverishly on the bridge like a man possessed by a demon of labor. Lightning struck the ocean around me several times, an intimidation tactic, no doubt. But the electricity in the air only fueled my determination even more. At last, I secured the final planks and finished the northern bridge. I yelled defiantly in the air and celebrated my triumph by gorging on raw salmon and downing an entire bottle of vodka. And soon, low tide fell into an alcohol-induced slumber, a much-needed rest. During the night, while low tide slept, a wild woman appeared to the northwest. She was naked and lost, like us, but not one of our tribe. Like two ships passing in the night, they were completely unaware of each other's existence. So close, yet an ocean apart. She had some good stats, and didn't mind getting her hands dirty, the kind of person you would want next to you in a fight. I don't know what caused her to go crazy out here, though I can look around and take a guess. If possible, we would try to rescue her. The thunderstorm had softened into a heavy rain overnight, and we started the day by adding another section to our northern bridge. We ran out of wooden planks about halfway through and needed to craft some more. For those of you unfamiliar, here's how you create a plank. Step 1. Gather up some raw wood. Any type of wood should do, but we're going to use these logs right here. The next step, bring that raw wood over to a crafting spot, or a crafting station if you're able to. As for the final step, you just simply need to saw the raw wood into 4 separate pieces, and in doing so, you've now created wooden planks. Great job. Perhaps as a reward for our determination yesterday, the sea gods provided us with a gift of sorts. A legendary dare, a fabled creature of great intelligence and unrivaled strength, appeared along the southern sandbars. It had the horns of a giant elk and the body of a dire bear. It also had a notorious appetite, so I was glad that it remained down there. I extracted what resources I could from the northern island and tore down the wreckage, exposing a great deal of soft sand as a result. Like a cramped game of Tetris, I needed to plan my item placement ahead of time and increase my storage capacity whenever possible. With our wood and cloth supplies increased, I sent low tide off once again to build a westward bridge. For days, a rainy overcast hung over our raft, interrupted periodically by fleeting patches of sunlight. The dark overcast made every sea creature seem more foreboding. Even creatures as unassuming as tuna appeared ferocious in the moody waves. Sherry was equally as fearsome. She was a great close-range fighter and needed to kill for every meal. But how long could she keep it up? I worked and fished and worked. My hands were calloused and my body ached. I subsisted off the same watery abyss which imprisoned me, and found peace only when I watched the sunset. My raft was a wooden sanctuary amid a sea of chaos, but the wooden planks beneath my feet could not fill the void I felt inside. There was an eternal dread lingering within me, a deep fear knowing that I was very likely the last member of my tribe, the last seahorse. On the 15th of April-May, there was reason for celebration. I had fished out a fedora from the sea. It was a plain white hat of normal quality. But out here, it was as good as masterwork. It would provide low tide with a small amount of heat insulation, but more importantly, it made him look like a proper gentleman. Early the next morning, I finished the first portion of the western bridge, and my focus was immediately drawn to the skeletal remains of one of my tribespeople. Her name was Maya, or Maya. I couldn't recall which, as I only knew her from afar. Her clothes were ripped into shreds, and her bones were picked clean by the birds. Traditionally, we burned our dead at sea. Unfortunately, I didn't have the additional resources to spare. I'm sure she would understand. So instead, I opted for the next best thing I can think of, and dug a grave in the exposed sandbar to the north. Her body wouldn't burn, but her bones and spirit would be with the sea all the same. I carefully wrapped Maya, or Maya, in some eel leather and buried her in the sand. After saying a few prayers, I stood by her in silence to comfort her spirit as it transferred to the sea. In truth, she was comforting me just as much. I stared down at her grave, and I couldn't help but think of my own mortality. Now that my people were gone, who would remember me? On day 15, I began construction towards the nearest supplies to the south. My early momentum was interrupted by a hungry red snapper who foolishly took my bait. I charged in at once and thrusted my spear into its belly. It was a brutal battle, a classic showdown of man versus beast. Despite an abysmal medical skill, Low Tide was able to patch himself up well enough, but the serious pain he experienced was another complaint on a very long list. After turning the red snapper into lunch, we were greeted by a dolphin. Many people considered them to be peaceful, but that couldn't be further from the truth. No, seriously, look into it. They're monsters. She ate a good chunk of the red snapper I had laid out, and there was nothing we could do about it. Dolphins packed a powerful bite, and if I wanted to hunt larger animals like this, I would need a weapon with some range and a little bit more punch, so the porpoise was safe for now. My wonderful fishing trap continued to provide, even while I slept. Every day it would snag me something useful. Today it brought me pemmican from the tides. This fueled me through my work, and within an hour the southern bridge was completed. This area contained 2 chinapas, little artificial islands that the farmers of my tribe would place on boats to cultivate crops at sea. They could be built by combining planks, hay, and some type of stone chunk. I planted hay on them to start. In time, this would provide me with enough hay to build another one, and on it would go until I had enough chinapas to begin cultivating other crops. The rest of my time was spent crafting a short bow. Low Tide was much better at ranged combat, and I didn't want to miss out on bringing down another large animal if they came our way. It wouldn't be our long-term weapon, but it would do for now. A few days prior, I added an expansion to our raft. This would provide us with additional storage space and just living area in general. Utilizing this new area, I created a stone cutting station. Coral made for a strong stone replacement, and I began to turn these pink chunks into useful building blocks. It wasn't long before the dolphin came back around, no doubt searching for another easy meal. Just look at that mischievous face. This time, however, we were prepared. Low Tide moved into position on the southern bridge. He whiffed his first shot, but the second one was a hit. Swim, Low Tide. Swim. Swim away. Oh God, it nearly caught us. Fortunately for us, dolphins don't have legs, so we're able to shoot it from the safety of our raft. One arrow, then another, and another, and there we go. At last, the vicious beast had been slain, and what a fine meal it would be. Such a great hunt deserved an equally great celebration, so I built a coral stone fire pit in order to cook the dolphin meat into proper meals. Like the heroic survivor Tom Hanks once declared, "Look what I have made! Fire! I made fire!" For the first time in a while, I felt the comforting heat of a campfire's flames. They danced exotically against the horizon, and I watched as the hues of red and orange merged with the sunset behind it. And it was a warm reminder that there is true beauty to be found anywhere in the world, even out here. However, not all was well in Low Tide's little ocean world. Chunks of spacecraft plummeted down during our feast, destroying some of the flotsam to the far north. And unfortunately, Sherry had died at some point. It seems that a combination of blood loss and food poisoning had done her in, but she went out doing what she loved the most, fighting. The next few days passed uneventfully, and the boring pattern of routine grew from the mundane tasks that we needed for survival. We conducted a symphony of cooking, fishing, and organization to pass the time. After a while, the ocean itself seemed dull, and even the trivial task of fighting a sea snail felt thrilling in comparison. On the 7th of August, a caravan appeared along the eastern horizon. They were travelers from the Orange Ocean Settlement, a wonderful name for sea traders. They were led by Therese Protein Newton, a truly iconic man. He rode atop a large swimming bowl and carried a volcanic pistol, though he preferred fighting with his fists, like a real man. Many of the others wore orange hats, while some remained hatless. It seemed that headgear was treated as some sort of ranking system within their colony. They were such interesting and mysterious people. I had hoped that my fire would bring them in closer to investigate, but they didn't seem to notice. There was a lot of wreckage, after all. Sometime later, we completed the second portion of the southern bridge and hauled up the fishing net. It worked the same as the wooden fishing trap, it just looked nicer. And right on cue, the new fishing trap caught a fantastic item for me, a light SMG. Can you believe it? Surely the sea gods sent this magnificent gift my way. Such advanced weaponry was somewhat foreign to Low Tide, but he had seen them used before by exotic pirates and traders. It was just a more powerful bow, that's all. Much like the sea, life continues to move at its own pace. Some days feel motionless, while others rapid and chaotic. At any moment, life can spring a challenge upon us, and for some, that may ultimately result in their untimely end. Like a sea snail sleeping too close to our raft, it became the unprovoked victim of target practice for our new weapon. It works really well, by the way. Or how about these sea sponges? They seem to be content with dominating my entire sandbar, but I'm sick of looking at them. There's far too many of them. They needed to be cut down and humbled. You may call it desponginization, but I call it a lesson well learned. Some creatures take life into their own hands and go on the offensive, thinking they can decide their fate. Sometimes this works, but if you take a wrong turn, then your time ends no differently than any of the others. For this is the delicate balance. Low Tide lives his life one raft bridge at a time. What about you? With some basic housekeeping taken care of, I expanded east once more. Low Tide probably felt trapped in some weird bridge-building time loop, a twisted purgatory of isolation and raw fish. But we've all felt that way at some point in our lives, right? The luck of the sea was truly with us. Low Tide hauled up bars of gold from the ocean depths, along with other oddities. Hours later, another gift was presented to us. A great white shark, arguably the most deadly sea creature, emerged near the western bridge. Was this another divine test of my strength? I leapt into action and ordered Low Tide to take up arms against the apex predator. Our semi-automatic arrows of lead pierced the shark's thick skin repeatedly. I began to grow overconfident from all the successful hits, and I stepped near the water's edge. The wounded shark had plenty of fight left and launched out at me with surprising speed, landing a painful bite on my leg. Its powerful jaws came just a hair short of fully ensnaring my limb. I unloaded the full clip of my weapon into the oversized fish until it could no longer move. Fortunately, my injury was nothing more than a horrific flesh wound, but one that would recover over time. These sharks are absolute tanks and take a lot of punishment before going down. I thanked the warrior fish for a worthy battle and plunged my knife into its skull, ending its suffering. If I plan on hunting any more of them, then I need to consider getting a bigger boat. The Chinampas grew the hay that we would need to create more of them, while our planters contained both cotton plants and fiber corn. There was one problem though. I didn't have a way to utilize the freshly picked cotton. Thankfully, Low Tide had some of his tribe's notes on the boat with him, various texts that taught the complex techniques of different crafts. One of these tomes contained the archaic art of textile spinning and gave solid instructions on how to craft a spinning wheel. With a plan now in place, I set up a research spot on our boat and started our pursuit of knowledge. Much like the samurai, he was a well-rounded warrior. A fearsome troll emerged from the sea along the submerged sandbar to the northwest. Even from this distance, its giant size was easy to spot. Its presence seemed to have caused a blight on my cotton plants, and I was forced to cut my losses and start anew. Now I can only hope for better yields. The far wreckage to the southeast was a bloody mess. It appears that two crocodiles had a disagreement of sorts and settled it the old-fashioned way. See, folks, everyone loses when you resort to violence. I spotted a large stack of hay near the Sea Dancer. It had been slowly deteriorating over the past 2 seasons, and it would eventually wilt away altogether. It would be a nice addition to my resource pile, and it would sure help with making chinampas, but I don't know if we'll make it there in time. With only 27 days left, we're cutting it close. In the early hours of September 8th, an uneasiness fell over the area. A group of unfriendly-looking furry people appeared to the northwest. I've seen groups like them before. They were raiders, dangerous folks, only interested in loot and slaves. Luckily, they weren't targeting us. They were more intent on causing destruction to any flotsam they could reach. They set ablaze any wreckage they could find, and the flames stirred up the bloodlust in some of the nearby fauna. A great white shark and a tuna battled to the death. Another great white actually fell in battle to a giganticonda, but the serpent was also dying from its grievous wounds. And the turtles, oh, the poor turtles. They fled for the water, but a few of them received minor burns before they could. The whole area had descended into chaos. On the other hand, Low Tide was enjoying the peaceful company of a curious sea turtle. Sure, we could have hunted it down, but why would we? We had plenty to eat, and the turtle's tranquil energy resonated with our own. We spent some time fishing, and later on constructed an iron research bench. This bench would greatly boost our research speed. It would be great if we could create an indoor area to make it even faster, but with our limited space that just wasn't an option. Later that night, steel rained down from the heavens above and landed near the southern bridge, narrowly missing the Chinapas. On day 37, a man fell from the sky, an animal farmer named Merlin Frederick. They weren't a particularly good colonist, and there was no way to help them, even if I wanted to. So there they stayed. They were at the mercy of the seagulls now. Best of luck, Merlin. Another person crashed down from the sky, this time a woman named Nark. Honestly, she was fantastic. I wish we could have saved her, but I was still trapped here on my little wooden island. That afternoon, we finished researching textile spinning and played some more Tetris with our supplies to make room for the spinning wheel. Some traders from the League of Koyo arrived from the east. They were from the same faction as Nark, but for some reason they continued to ignore her desperate pleas for rescue. Apparently she must have done something seriously wrong for them to disregard her in such a way. They just walked right over her body and talked to each other, pretending as if she didn't even exist. Poor Nark. Such a horrible way to go out. At least she was around some of her people. Later on, we crafted the spinning wheel and followed the instructions in my tribe's ancient texts. It took a while to get accustomed to the foreign process of textile spinning, but soon we were making cloth at an efficient rate, and thanks to this, work finally resumed on the northeastern bridge. Making cloth became the #1 priority, with making planks right behind that. When I ran out of cotton, I used bison wool to make more. Before long, the expansion to the northeast was complete. This gave me access to extra wood, some storage, a log seat, and a drying rack. After that, I built my first chinapa and planted more haygrass upon it. The stalk of haygrass near the sea dancer was mostly gone. The flock of seagulls had seen to that. I only had 14 days left before it expired. I might reach it, but I had my doubts. In preparation for our big western expansion, I laid out some plans and relocated the cloth and wood storage nearer to the building site to make it as efficient as possible. Running short on bridge building supplies, I tore apart the northeastern expansion altogether. There were good resources to the far north, but the time and materials it would take to reach them simply weren't worth it. Being a sole survivor, there are many things needing to be done, but only one of you to do them. Energy is often low, and even needing to stop to fish for sustenance feels like time that could be better well spent. I needed some sort of pick-me-up that can carry me to this bridge building finish line. You know what they say, when the sea hands you canned toxic liquid lemons, then you better drink all of that lemonade. I ordered Low Tide to pound down an energy drink for the first time in his life. The rush of energy left him visibly shaking, and he felt like he had wings. High on caffeine, I worked and moved at a much quicker pace. Sure, there would be an energy crash later on, but who cares? That's what sleep is for, right? Once again, traders from the League of Koya emerged from the east. I'm starting to suspect that they're part of some rescue party looking for survivors, but they need to start checking over here. Later on, a pack of man-hunting flamingos descended upon the Koya people. It was an epic battle of bullets, beaks, and blood. In a few heartbeats, the pink monsters fell, and the traders patched up their wounds. I didn't notice before, but there was more croc-on-croc violence here too. Man, these things really have it out for each other. Day 55 began with a most welcomed surprise. A manta ray had tamed itself to me. It was a moment of exuberance and celebration. Look at it. Look at it go. Look how majestic it is. No longer would I have to be alone. Now I had a friend, a true companion who came to me. Perhaps they too were feeling isolated from their people. We were two kindred spirits joined by circumstances beyond our control. In honor of the special occasion, I named him Rey Mysterio, for he was a manta ray, and he had a mysterious nature about him. He even ate the sea sponges. He really was the greatest companion I could ask for. That's it, Rey. Go ahead. Explore your new home. Enjoy the freedom and splendor that is our ocean abode. Just don't drink those energy drinks. Oh god, you wouldn't like those. We built Rey Mysterio a rawhide kelp bed and placed it near our own. He would only know the greatest of comforts from here on out. and together we slept soundly beneath the stars, our hearts filled with the contentment of companionship once again. The 13th of December started off well. We finished another section of our Western Bridge network. It leapfrogged over several submerged sandbars and ended at a wrecked raft. Man, that was a tongue twister, all that. And a new group of raiders appeared along the very popular eastern horizon. They began to set fire to what little flotsam remained. This meant nothing to me, but it destroyed the homes of the local kiwis and turtles, truly showcasing the types of monsters these raiders really were. With the final cinders having burnt out, the raiders were pleased with themselves, and they left at some point during the night. And so it began. Several days of grinding and building. A few times our work was interrupted. Other times we were provided natural inspiration. A trap was made, planks were laid, and more crops were planted at the start of April-May. To my dismay, we lost the hay, so instead I trained Ray. It took all okay, that's enough of that. We worked hard during the daylight, and at night we relaxed. Entertainment was hard to come by, and was mostly provided by the world around us. One evening, we watched an epic fight between a great white shark and a dolphin. They went blow for blow, like two kaiju battling it out in the middle of the ocean. And it was a coin flip as to who the winner would be until the very end. Low tide was sure to reward the victor for their efforts. Day 60 arrived faster than I had anticipated. Today marks 1 full year since I awoke on this raft. Despite this hard reality, the recent progress I've been making has my spirits high. Fittingly, a thunderstorm swept in, just as it did exactly 1 year prior. Images swirled in my mind, flashbacks to that fateful day. They were more vivid this time around, and it seems that the isolation and passage of time has cleared my head. I remembered now. Our fleet was making good progress towards other lands. Already we had met some new tribes for us to trade with. It was during the after hours of the chieftain's birthday party that a sudden rainstorm had started. Some friends and I had gone inside to escape the downpour. We then heard a commotion in one of the storage rooms and found that intruders had snuck aboard. They were in the middle of some bizarre ritual. We fought against them and broke their incantation. But then, something powerful jolted the ship and breached the hull. Water poured in, quickly flooding the chamber. Everybody raced to get back to the deck, but the cultists began jumping atop us, trying to entrap us in the water with them. One of the assailants leapt atop me from behind and began digging at my skin and clothes with her dagger-like nails. I frantically fought against her, and in the commotion my tribal wear was torn completely off. But in that moment I had no modesty. I punched her square in the jaw and heard a loud crack as I did so. I attempted to help one of my companions, but the ship was rocked again, and I was thrown to the side. An immense surge of water rushed through as the ship was torn apart. Both friend and foe disappeared before me, swept away into the sea. I somehow managed to pull myself back to the deck, or what was left of it. And that is when I heard that strange sound. It was unlike anything I've heard before. It was a high-pitched cackle mixed with the low guttural growl of an agitated crocodile. And the creature which emitted the sound was just as difficult to describe. It was an offense to the sea gods themselves, the perverse offspring of man and squid. It was tall and slender and cloaked in a dark robe. Its skin was greenish blue, and there were 2 tentacle-like appendages protruding from the sleeves in its robe. Most noticeable of all were the 2 bulbous eyes that appeared to sit on the lower sides of its face, large orbs of burning charcoal. The strange thing reached in my direction, but then an enormous wave washed over us, and I smashed my head against the deck. Then my world faded to black. What was that thing? And why did it target us? A streak of lightning slammed down nearby and forced me out of my daydream. It was a close call, and something I should have been more aware of. I shook my head. These unsettling memories I have, I couldn't even be sure if they were real. When the only voice you hear for 4 seasons is your own, everything begins to feel like a fever dream. More lightning struck around me. My body shook even more. How was I, Low Tide, a proud warrior of the Seahorse tribe, so paralyzed by these memories. I nearly jumped out of my skin when something touched my leg. I turned instinctively to swing, but then I saw it was my new friend, Ray. Ah, Ray, my last bastion of hope. Somehow he understood my pain. He was mysterious like that. I patted Ray on his fin as a thank you, for his reassurance was what I needed most in that moment. An elder once told me that fear is like an ocean. It's composed of your anxieties, your insecurities, your nightmares. It's a powerful force that can swallow you whole, but for those who are courageous enough to sail upon it, you'll soon learn that it can be a valuable ally and even a friend. I took a steadying breath and relinquished myself to the roaring waves. My head went under for a few seconds, and in that moment, I felt weightless and free. To my surprise, I wasn't thrown into the coral or dragged down into the inky abyss below. No, the water was calm around me. A beautiful bioluminescent glow began to encompass me. Some of it took the shape of different sea creatures, like ghostly apparitions. Ray saw them too. He was swimming and playing along several bioluminescent mantas.
It's Maya.
I heard a voice whisper in my ear. I turned and saw the spectral figure of a woman floating before me. We reached out for each other at the same time, and when our hands touched, a warm, calming sensation raced through my body. I couldn't see any expression on the being's face, but I could feel it smiling peacefully. Somehow, they knew. She faded away into the gentle current, like a shadow being blown apart by a breeze. I was sad to see her go, but I was also excited for the journey she had ahead. Only then did I notice the dozens of other apparitions floating around me. An uplifting warmth filled the water, and in unison, they all dissipated back into the ocean. And the sea was dark once again. I resurfaced sometime later, with Ray by my side. I let out a hearty laugh that involuntarily erupted from deep within me as I was overwhelmed with joy. My tears joined the salty waves. Finally, I was truly at one with the sea. More days passed, and work continued. Not much changed during that time. Once, our journey was nearly ended by a pack of man-hunting tortoises. Fortunately for us, the fearsome little creatures couldn't traverse the deeper waters. They were soon followed by another pack of manhunters, this time kiwis, probably the cutest bloodthirsty animals I've ever seen. Thankfully, they too were trapped down there with the man-hunting tortoises. There's just a whole lot of manhunters here. This is a dangerous place to live, especially if you're a man. I began crafting a lot of coral blocks, and it soon dawned on me that I can make more planters with them. Of course. Oh, what a fool I've been. Many in-game weeks could have been saved if I had just realized this sooner. Over the next few days, I clogged the bridges with planters and sowed more fiber corn and cotton. After some time together, Ray Mysterio and I formed a bond. We had a sacred friendship that few could ever understand, but there was a kinship of souls that was unbreakable. One dolphin has been hanging around the past few days looking for handouts. My animal skill was high enough to try taming it, so I gave it a shot. Success! We added a new dolphin friend to our now growing tribe. He will be called Dolphin 1 until he could prove himself to us, or until we think of something better. In the middle of the night, a maddened green eel viciously attacked me. With no other choice, I was forced to put it down. At least its suffering was at an end. I don't know why, but the startling attack inspired me to finally give Dolphin 1 an actual name, and I named him Dolph. Don't laugh, it's a great name, a strong name. I built Dolph a kelp bed next to Ray Mysterio, and together we slumbered. I'll look at Ray, putting his fin over Dolph. They're too adorable. Time, much like the tide, continues to flow in and out. Sometimes it's exciting, other times dull. I've learned to appreciate the dull times. I watch the sun rise and set, grow crops for a better future, spend time with great friends. Hours turned into days, and days into weeks. A continuous cycle of slow, grinding progress. A strange man crashed atop the Sea Dancer. Laurent the Selfish. Sounds like a Game of Thrones character. He bled all over the flagship. I saw no reason to save such a dishonorable man. Another man fell from the sky a few days later, this time within our reach. Odile Huffman. Oh wow, this guy's amazing. Never mind, paralytic aphasia strikes again. Sorry about this, Odile. We just don't have the time or resources to care for you. Just go ahead and watch that sunset for me. That's it. Just keep watching the sunset. Oh god, that took more bullets than I expected. Well, at least he's no longer suffering. Time to bury... Oh, there appears to be a hungry dolphin. Well, then go ahead. Consume his body. Who am I to disrupt this circle of life? Something odd happened on the 84th day. I was training Rey Mysterio, as usual, when suddenly he bit my tribal wear and dragged me into the deep ocean with him. I could feel the powerful undercurrent tugging at me, but Rey's sleek build and deceptive strength seemed to easily overcome that issue. It was obviously a playful act, and I even managed to straddle him like a horse for a few minutes before nearly falling off. He then guided us back to the shallow water, and I was left momentarily stunned. What just happened? The experience was thrilling, and it conjured up memories of other tribes I had seen in the past. Some tribes had beast speakers and shamans, tamers who mastered the ability of riding animals even in the ocean. I wondered if my tribe had ever possessed such knowledge as well. If we did, it would have to be somewhere on the Sea Dancer. I continued improving my storage situation and migrated more materials down near the Sea Dancer. I fashioned a backpack for myself using some of the rawhide I had been storing. Another thing I wish I realized a year ago. This would increase my carrying capacity by 40 kilograms, which should make hauling this stuff around just a bit easier. The season of September went by fast. Hardly anything had happened during that stretch of time. There were fights, of course, and the occasional bizarre animal behavior. At some point, a heat wave nearly killed me, and I made new tribal wear to counter that. And a teenager named Molt crash-landed up near the space debris. He wasn't long for this world. In the early hours of day 99, we achieved our goal. We had reached the Sea Dancer. Months of grueling construction had finally paid off, and now we could rejoice. The flagship of my tribe was now back in good hands, and I wasted no time in planning its restoration. The first plan of action was to get more planks. For this, I used the wooden trestle on the deck of the Sea Dancer. It allowed me to cut more planks at a faster rate. I refueled the ship's lantern to symbolize the rebirth of the Seahorse tribe. Now, whenever passerbys look out to sea, they should notice the tall light. I reorganized some of the ship's furniture to suit my needs, and began construction then after. It didn't take long to install the first portions of the deck, but I stopped when something caught my attention from the corner of my eye. Piles of dusty, old parchment were on the ground. And that's when I noticed the hidden compartment beneath the shelf I had moved earlier. These texts were safely kept, but for what purpose? I scanned through them briefly. There were many words and diagrams of various items. It seemed like these were entries of work from many different contributors, based on the different handwriting and art styles. One entry I found taught the reader how to construct fins for your feet. They referred to them as flippers. Another seemed to dive into the complexities of animal training. These secret texts were incredible. They must have been passed down between chieftains during transitions of leadership. I wanted to learn more, but it would take some time to study all the details. I decided it would be best to focus on the ship for now. The restoration efforts continued, and I relocated our beds to the Sea Dancer to be closer to my work. When I slept aboard the Sea Dancer that evening, an unusual feeling hung in the air. I awoke in the middle of the night with a lingering question on my mind. Why was I restoring the ship? For over a year, I had pushed myself to reach this very goal, but now that I had it in hand, it felt so hollow. I had convinced myself that I would repair the Sea Dancer and sail out of here, but how could I possibly do that? Even if I managed to repair the ship, a vessel of this size needed at least a 6-person crew. I looked over at Ray and Dolph, the friends I had made along this tumultuous journey. Their quiet snores brought me some measure of peace. What would happen to them if I sailed away? I tried to sleep the thoughts away, but I barely found any. The next morning I awoke and attempted to follow the same routine of repairing the ship, but I stopped only after a few hours. I could still hear my mother's voice saying to me, "You're as stubborn as a clam." She was always right. This situation was no different. I wanted to restore the ship because I was afraid of letting go of the past. Subconsciously, I believed that if I mended it, it would somehow bring back my tribe. But the truth was, they were gone. My people had returned to the sea. I witnessed that myself. This wreckage, the last remnants of my kinfolk, it's nothing more than rotting wooden bones. The last person you can ever convince of the truth is yourself. I can see that now. I thought again of the text I'd scanned through yesterday. That knowledge was the legacy of the Seahorse tribe. Those passages contained the solutions I needed in order to leave this place. With a determined stride, I went back to the secret parchment and began researching the ancient knowledge of my people. Time went by like a blur. I'd only broken away from my studies when I needed to eat or rest. On the night of day 111, I had finished researching the first ancient tool that would aid me on my journey. Flippers. Glorious flippers. It took me a few days to build the appropriate crafting table necessary for creating the mystical flippers, but now I was ready. After a few hours, 2 of them were finished. They felt odd on my feet. When I walked along the deck, it appeared as though I had duck feet, and it slowed my movement considerably. However, when I jumped in the shallow water, my swimming speed had drastically increased. With the slightest flick of my feet, I was propelled forward several yards. I even felt daring enough to edge myself out into the deeper water. The powerful current dragged against me, but this time I was able to kick through it without exerting too much energy. I continued practicing throughout the day and grew bolder and more adventurous. Being able to navigate the deeper waters came at a cost. I was more exposed to the ocean creatures around me than ever before. At one point, my growing confidence nearly cost me my life. I was gathering materials when suddenly, Dolph had let out a series of distressed clicks. I turned and saw the dorsal fin of a hammerhead shark charging toward me. I had managed to reach the boat just in time to narrowly avoid the shark's ferocious bite. Rey Mysterio rushed in against the creature and tore into it with his sharp tail. Before long, the attack was over. The shark was felled. Rey sustained a minor bruise to his left fin. The shark literally hammered him with its head. I treated his wounds and gave him a snack. It was the least I could do. I was truly unworthy of such a selfless companion. By the day's end, I was exhausted. Some raiders from the Purple Delta showed up, but they just kind of wandered around. From the looks of it, they were disorganized and were probably just trying to find each other. Flippers became a big game changer for us. Now the entire area was our playground. Life in general was made much easier. The boys and I patrolled the sea together. We practiced swimming in formation. We chased each other around. It was a marvelous time indeed. I wouldn't last longer than a day out in the open water. These extraordinary flippers weren't the permanent means to my escape, but they were a very helpful tool all the same. I soon turned back to my studies of the ancient knowledge, in particular, the entries on animal taming and riding. If I can learn to master this technique, then I can ride out of here on Rey Mysterio, and hopefully find some of the trading groups I've spotted throughout the year. It seemed unbelievable, but day 120 had arrived. 2 years we had been stranded. 2 years we toiled and survived. A noble griffin had landed down on the southern sandbar, a fearsome, mythical beast of legend. Whether it was a sign from the gods or mere happenstance, I could not say. A man named Dude, that's right, Dude, landed near our raft. Unfortunately for him, he was a liar, and he had paralytic aphasia. That's a bad combination, my dude. We ended his suffering and buried him near Maya. We also found a gigantic cobra and butchered it for a lot of meat. And I mean a lot of meat. The animal riding research was extensive. It took well over a week before I finished reading the entries. However, the many days of grinding was well worth it. I learned a great deal during my studies, such as how to better communicate with my companions through hand gestures and sound. I taught them how to follow me, how to pick me up if I fell off, and what direction to travel in. Dolph was too small to bear my weight, so he would have to flank us and scout ahead if needed. Rey Mysterio was much stronger than his graceful build let on. He seemed unfazed when riding with me, even with a backpack full of supplies. We practiced for a full day, and that evening I finished collecting all that I needed for the journey ahead. On the morning of day 133, I gave one last look at everything I had built. For the past 2 years, this was my home, my solace, my prison. The greatest challenge of survival at sea is psychological. The endless cycle of sunrise and sunset, the ever-moving waves, the loneliness that no amount of recreation can overcome. Isolation is a punishment that should be reserved for only the most evil of people, but sometimes it's a path that leads us to new horizons and great friendships. The lessons learned and the memories I've made here will stay with me forever. This is the very spot where my tribe was lost, and also where my new tribe was found. The most important thing I learned is that if you find yourself and know who you really are, you can overcome anything. I don't know what awaits us beyond the horizon, but what I do know is that we don't need to search for a home. For as long as we have each other, we're already there. I smiled at the newest members of the Seahorse tribe, and together we set off into the unknown. Nothing like a raft video to get you in the fishing mood, eh, Rambler? Guess what? I got a one-liner for you. What does a fish say when it hits a concrete wall? Damn. What's that? You got a bite? Nice. We'll put that in some sushi later. Yeah, things are pretty relaxed here in the harbor. My boy Rambler's really been helping build up the place. He crafts various items, fixes stuff the harbor master breaks, and he's even working on a new building behind the tavern. We're a humble village, and we're proud of it. If you'd like to help build the town up with us, consider becoming a channel member or joining the Patreon. On the highest tier, you get a custom character that'll show up here in every video, and I'm still adding other rewards too. You could patrol the docks with Harbor Master, help Rambler Uno fix up the town, or do something crazy on this wooden ship. It's completely up to you. But if you don't have the spare silver, don't worry about it. Likes, comments, and all that good stuff goes a long way. I'd love to make this a full-time thing at some point, so I could churn out better content at a faster pace for you guys. And hopefully, one day we'll get there. But that's enough of that. It's time to dig into the next video. Wait, guys, where are you going? Hey friends! Today, I'm going to be borrowing a great Rimworld challenge from both Ambiguous Amphibian and more recently, Hazor. I'm going to be surviving 100 days underground with a solo colonist, completely encased in stone. We're going to be playing on Naked Brutality, and using the Cassandra Classic setting, Drive to Survive of course, because honestly, the start is already hard enough. In order to survive inside a mountain, I needed a pawn that was as tough and reliable as the stone itself. So everyone meet Void, an iron-willed dirt mole whose name kinda matches his current predicament. His skills and passions are well suited for an entombed existence, as well are his innate features such as dark vision and elite mining. And it's from here where our story begins. In the early hours of day 1, my drop pod crashed down in the center of what can only be described as an endless sea of stone. Seeing no other options and not wanting to dwell on how bleak my situation was, I put myself to work carving paths in the surrounding rock. 2 primal needs dominated my mind at that first day: food and shelter. Water would have been a third, but luckily we don't get thirsty out here on the rim. Shelter would be easy. There was plenty of rock that could be mined out into rooms and corridors. Food, on the other hand, would be much harder to come by. For that, I would need to plant Nutrifungus, the only food capable of growing underground. In just the early hours of my mining, I came upon a small cavern to the north, where I found the survival meals that I had brought with me in my drop pod. There were only 10 of them, so I would need to ration them carefully. If I'm going to survive long term, I'll also need to set some goals. The first goal is creating a sustainable food source. In all likelihood, that would just be the Nutrifungus. The second goal is finding a way to generate electricity underneath a mountain. And finally, the last goal is to survive at least 100 days here underground. Anything beyond that is considered extra. With my goals in mind and some mining having been completed, I laid on the relatively soft fungal gravel and drifted off to sleep, concluding my first day. On the second day, I dug out more of the encompassing stone. The hollows left in the wake of my pickaxe began to resemble the shape of rooms and corridors, and I roofed off the patches of disgusting sunlight that peeked through the openings in the cavern ceiling. For now, almost every open floor space will be converted into fungal gravel, which can in turn be used as a growing spot for the life-giving nutrifungus. I don't recall exactly when, but at some point, Void placed a chunk of granite symbolically in the same spot where we landed. Perhaps this was a way to remember where we started, or maybe where we're going. Some sort of a keystone, if you will. This is all speculation, of course, for only Void really knows the true meaning behind it, but either way, I like the aesthetic of it, so it'll stay there for now. On day 4, we discovered compacted steel, and a lot of it. Steel was a much needed addition to our skimp resource pile. Now, we can make many useful items and furniture, the first of which being a stonecutter's table. With this table, I can turn all these unsightly granite chunks into useful stone blocks for construction. The following day, I made a steel bed. It was of poor quality, unfortunately, but that's better than fungal gravel. At least I think it is. More importantly, I made a horseshoe pin, which provides Void with a much needed source of entertainment, preventing his thoughts from slipping too much towards despair. A few days later, it was the 2nd of April-May, marking the end of Void's first week inside the mountain. It feels like I've barely gotten anything done when I look around. However, like most things, when you step back and look at the whole picture, your progress becomes easier to see and appreciate. I fill my time by cutting granite blocks and repurposing them into storage shelves and traps. I'm not anticipating any trouble during my time here, however, I want to be prepared all the same. Over the next few days, I evenly paced myself between the excitement of trap building and horseshoes to the calming repetition of mining and planting, all the while dancing gracefully along the fine line of starvation. It's almost become an art form, knowing just when to eat so I don't actually starve to death. On the 10th day, we enjoyed the taste of our last packaged meal. It would probably be the last for a long time. Luckily, just a day later, my first patch of nutrifungus was mature enough to eat. Sure, it wasn't a full harvest by any means, but the few bits of fungi would bring me enough nourishment to get me by another day. On the 13th day, I rejoiced. It was the first mature nutrifungus harvest. Gone were the days of eating under-ripened mushrooms. We'd only know the taste of hearty, full-grown fungi from this day forward. It seems that the mountain is grateful for my company, as it generously gifted me with another large vein of compacted steel. Perhaps the mountain is a living, breathing organism, some stoic titan of the ancient past that yearns for friendship. Did it somehow attract my drop pod here, pulling me directly into the belly of the beast? Nah, what am I saying? That sounds crazy. It's just so easy to lose track of yourself when staring at these mono-colored walls all day, working with the same purplish blocks and same everything. Huh. Well, I'll just continue praying to the walls just in case the mountain is listening. A few days later, in a desperate attempt to obtain some wood, I tried to grow fiber corn, thinking that being near a sunny opening in the ceiling would help with the growth. But as it turns out, a growing spot needs to be in direct sunlight, so even being one adjacent square away, it would not be enough. Between the failed fiber corn experiment and having to continuously turn others away from being potential colonists, as there was no way for them to reach me, I realized that the artery-like corridors of the mountain were constricting me too much, and it was time for a change of scenery. So, I set upon a new task, one of smoothing the rough cavern floors and laying granite tiles. Sure, the coloration wouldn't be too different from what was already there, but the smoothness and shininess of the floors would help bring a clean feeling, and the slightly different shades of purple and brown would be just enough color variation to keep me sane. The 20th day brought with it a sudden heat wave. For the past few weeks, the temperature had been steady thanks to being, inside of a mountain, but now all of that has changed, and like most problems in life, I chose to ignore it for now. As the day turned to night, the heat continued its relentless assault, and my mountain chamber did little to protect me. I attempted trapping the heat in separate rooms, assuming it might have been coming from the corridors that I had stretched out over the last few days, but that seemed to have no effect. What's worse, heat stroke was beginning to creep into my body, causing me to sweat profusely. I decided to improve my comfort and built a granite bed. It took some time, but unlike my previous one, this one reflected the drastic improvement in my construction capabilities. I relocated my excellent bed to the coolest chamber available, and prayed again to the mountain gods for the heat's stranglehold to relent. A day later, despite the repressive heat, I finished building a chess table to help expand my entertainment options. I always found the pursuit of min-maxing strategy and tactics to be exciting and worthwhile, and this wonderful game would help me keep my mind sharp when so much else around me is dull. In time, the undergroundism gods heard my pleas, and the heat wave dissipated. The days meandered by, and the ring of my hammer and chisel was slowly replaced by the shuffle of papers as I began researching biofuel refining at the new research table I had built for myself. But just when I had found a comfortable rhythm between tasks and downtime, my health took a sudden downturn. Sensory mechanites, small mechanical mites that can make their home in my nervous system, had entered my body. The pain wasn't so bad yet, and my decent skill in medical helped a bit, but I knew from the literature I had studied about such things there was no cure to this, so it's just something I was going to have to deal with for now. More days passed of mundane routine, and finally, after nearly 5 weeks in the cocoon of stone, I discovered components. Admittedly, I should have been strip mining way sooner than I am now, but time has a funny way of sneaking past you down here in the Underdark. After all, there's only so many tasks one can accomplish in a day. Energy, much like nutrifungus, is a dwindling resource that needs to be replenished constantly. On the 15th of August, the 5-week mark since my arrival, I completed construction on the biofuel refinery. This would be the first major step towards sustainable electricity, but there still remained one obstacle yet to overcome. The refinery needed power in order to operate, so I would need some form of electricity before I can create fuel for more electricity. This would prove problematic. Thankfully, when you're stuck in a hole inside of a mountain, there isn't much else to do other than work and think. Pondering on my dilemma, an alternate solution soon came to mind. The thing that I hated the most, I can turn into a resource. With this new epiphany, I began immediately researching how to harness the power of the dreaded demon in the sky, the sun. Things were going swimmingly for a few days, until on day 41, all production came to a sudden crash, as did my body. I had contracted food poisoning from eating too many raw mushrooms. That horrible pain in combination with the sensory mechanites had me cradling in a pile of my own vomit. Through sheer willpower, I methodically pulled myself back to my bed and waited for the internal storm of agony to subside. During the early hours of September 11th, quite a fitting date, I felt an unusual tremble in the ground. Could it have been an earthquake? Perhaps, though I had experienced such red flags before. For now, there was nothing I can do other than speculate. Forcing those dark thoughts to the back of my mind, I focused on completing my research on solar power. I even learned that without being fully exposed to the sun, a panel can still generate some electricity. So I got to work removing my makeshift ceiling and moving some of the furniture into my adjacent bedroom. Using my much improved construction skill, I carefully combined the necessary components and materials and completed the massive solar panel. Seriously, this thing is way bigger than I remembered it being. But then again, I guess everything is when you're cramped inside of tight rooms. It would only be exposed to a few squares of light that shafted down through the mountain's surface, but it was enough sunlight to generate some electricity. The following morning, I constructed the necessary conduits and connected them with the refinery. I also assembled a complementary battery to help store the excess power the solar panel might afford. By late afternoon, everything was put together, and I successfully turned nutrifungus into chemfuel. It was an incredible day, a day of great achievement, akin to the tales of the philosopher's stone transmuting base metals into gold. So too was my skill in turning wonderful nutrifungus into fuel. Though tracking the passage of time down here in the rocky abyss seems fruitless, I believe that the simple routine of it all helps me maintain a stable mind. Luckily, this reminded me of the all-important date in undergroundism, the Dim Festival. The 14th marked the beginning of it, and there would at least be a few days afterwards in which I could celebrate my people. The Dim Festival was a celebration of the earth gods themselves, a party in which you're allowed to dance and were encouraged to do so as lustfully and as carefree as possible. However, if the festival was substandard in any way, the gods would be displeased, and you would earn their disfavor. I would need to construct a light ball, a wondrous item capable of creating pulsating streams of light that made dancing seem even more exotic. However, the light ball wasn't enough on its own. It would need to be accompanied by at least one loudspeaker. After all, a dim festival is only as good as its sound system. My father once told me that when you're hosting a party, never go cheap on the drinks or the music, and that sage undergrounder advice has stuck with me ever since. With a renewed surge of ideological purpose, I carefully crafted each item over the next few days. By the morning of December 1st, the dim festival was ready to begin. With sweaty palms and anxious breath, I turned on the light ball and the loudspeaker and allowed the music to begin. At first, my movements were stiff and measured, but I closed my eyes and felt the bass of the loudspeaker booming through my body, sending waves of chills up and down my spine. Soon, it felt as if the gods themselves were flowing through me, and I lost myself to the rhythm of the music. Then I began to have a vision. It was one of myself, standing upon a grassy hill. Along the horizon were chains of snow-capped mountains. There were great mountain temples and kingdoms from eons past. There were trees with stone trunks so tall their canopies were obscured by the clouds, and beasts of all sort inhabited the landscape. Flying lions with scorpion-like tails, dire bears, and giant ground-piercing armadillos, to name just a few. I don't know how long I was in my alternate state of mind, but I came to only when the music ended. A rush of joy overwhelmed me in that moment, and that is when I realized it was an unforgettable dim festival, one that I knew the gods gave me as a reward for my suffering and loyalty to them. And it was then that I knew I was destined to survive this ordeal. The following day, another test was put before me. The earth continued to tremble like it did a few weeks prior, this time more disturbingly. I knew for sure now there was a great swarm of insects amassing. The few traps that I had, though strong, would do little against whatever horde was building somewhere within the mountain. Luckily, I was able to get a sense as to what direction they were in, though that did little to comfort me. I would need to continue to pray and ask for answers and clarification, and perhaps try to fortify my defenses even more. The month of December went by like a blur. Each day is filled with the daily grind of research, farming, crafting, mining, eating, and, of course, sleeping. On the 64th day, I received a message from the Shattered Empire, a peoples that I did not know, but who seemed to know of me. They were asking permission to conduct a weather experiment in my area, a volcanic winter. I did not know if this would impact the bugs in any way, but I needed to try something. Seeing no downside to it, I accepted, and was sent a gift that I of course couldn't receive, somewhere out there in the void. Ha, see what I did? And thus began the volcanic winter. On day 70, my strip mining ventures went very well. I lucked into hitting some silver ore, followed immediately after by some uranium ore. However, my luck quickly changed. A sudden explosion erupted on one of my batteries, causing a fire to break out just a little bit. Thankfully, my precautions of building some solid granite walls between the different instruments proved to be valuable, as the fire did not spread very far, and I was quickly able to extinguish it. Despite the fire, I still continued to make great strides in my strip mining as I searched for more components. And, even better, my mining skill was continuing to gain in leaps and bounds. The undergroundism gods were quite pleased with my gains in mining, and filled me with a great inspiration for creativity. It was then that I knew I had been called for another purpose here, to construct a monument in their image, something for passerbys one day to pay homage to. After completing many of the necessary housekeeping tasks, I focused the last few days of my divine creativity boost on the dim image itself. Every ounce of sweat and drop of blood in my body, if necessary, would be poured into the construction of this great object. And thus, on the 12th of April, my magnum opus was complete. And there it was, the granite grand sculpture aptly named Void Sweat. This piece depicts black swooping arcs with black highlights bracketed between a meadow and a cliff. Void sits near an expanse, gazing at the sky. The work has a purest feeling and a well-balanced structure. Besides that, the scene takes place inside an encampment built near a stone. Maybe it's that keystone that we had started with at the very beginning of our journey here. That would be quite fitting. This depiction refers to Void's town illuminated by the light of an aurora on the 12th of December, 5501. Well, how wonderful. The gods would be pleased with my work. After completing the dim image, I set it up in my room next to another, smaller image I had created, and continued to work, now under the constant gaze of the approving gods. At some point, the gods had answered my prayers, and the chittering and block breaking of the infestations and bugs had ceased altogether. Perhaps that, or maybe they had just moved on, or maybe the volcanic winter did have some sort of permanent effect on them. I can't be quite sure. Time continued to pass, day and night, night into day, and I continued to mine out the mountain. After spending nearly 100 days under the mountain, it has now become so clear as to why I was crash-landed in this mountainous terrain. It wasn't to simply have a dance party or to create electricity or even to grow nutrifungus, though all those things were certainly important and required for me to gain this clarity. No, my true purpose here was to become a legendary master in mining, so I can serve my gods even greater in the future, and I would not let them down. Like a farmer tilling the soil, I continued to carve my way through strip mining the mountain. Stone could barely stand a few swings of my pickaxe in front of me before it collapsed down into chunks beneath my feet. Nothing satisfied me more than the crunch of my pickaxe, breaking free bits of the mountain, creating veins for life to flow through. Well, maybe the only other thing near it was the satisfying crunch of nutrifungus in my mouth. And it was on the 12th of August when I hit my goal. Level 20 in mining, a truly historical feat. I had become a legendary master, someone world-renowned for their mining skills. It was foolish of me to think that I could truly understand the whims of the gods as I begun on this journey, that though this was the end of my 100 days under this mountain, it was truly only the beginning of the future that my pickaxe would bring me to. It took the better part of an afternoon for me to carve my way out from the depths of the mountain onto the very edges where I knew the outside waited me. I had no idea what to expect as I continued to creep closer and closer, and doubt began to resurface in the back of my mind. It was odd, as I could feel the shift in the air and see bits of piercing light beginning to peek through the last crumbling parts of the mountain that lay in front of me. I couldn't help but stand there for several minutes staring. Was this really what I wanted? Once I broke through the surface, there truly was no going back. Was I ready? I allowed the doubt to creep over me and to envelop me for just a few heartbeats. And with one last steadying breath, I smashed my pickaxe down on the side of the mountain and caved in the final bits of stone that kept me locked inside for these 105 days. I pierced through, and a blinding light immediately assaulted me. At first, I couldn't be sure if it was some sort of alien weapon, but then I realized no. It was just the horrible sun. And so I pushed through and pushed out, and was immediately met with the skeletal remains of several insectoids that looked like they had been dead for many weeks. Somehow, some way, unknown to me, they had been dealt with. Perhaps it was divine intervention, perhaps it was something more entirely. I couldn't say. It seemed, based on my first observations, that they had tunneled in and made a home somewhere in some kind of ruin within the mountain along the edge. It was now up to me on what I decided to do next. I think I'll go down there and crack open a couple of those boxes and see what's inside. But that adventure will be for another day. But until then, I want to thank you all for being on this underground journey with me, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Take care, everybody. Void really dug himself out of a tricky situation there, wouldn't you agree? Man, how does he make mining look so effortless? I've been working on the same block for like an hour. Even Rambler's making it look easy. He must have been really digging that video, eh? Alright, that's enough mining puns. Watching these survival stories makes me reflect on my own life. All I do is hang around this town watching Rambler and Harbor Master do all the hard work. Meanwhile, I've got no talent to speak of. Well, I guess I am charming and quite good looking, but even Harbor Master's got me beat there. And what skills do I have? None. If you sent me back in time, I couldn't teach cavemen anything. Seriously. What am I? I feel so empty, so useless, like I just don't belong. Sometimes, I just want to walk away from it all. I wonder if there's ever been anyone else that's felt like me before. Someone who's felt like a burden to those around him. Maybe there's a lesson to learn in our next story. I guess it's time to find out. Everyone loves a good underdog story. There's nothing quite like watching someone start at the bottom of the proverbial ladder and climbing their way into the penthouse of success. But what if this sentiment applied to not just an individual, but to the entire region in which they inhabited? For a new challenge, I thought it would be fun to play as a pawn who starts with absolutely nothing. And I mean nothing. Our resources, nothing. Our skills, nothing. Our body, nothing. Our starting area, a vast expanse of, you guessed it, empty desert. I'll be starting as a tribal colonist who is lacking all the essential ingredients needed for survival. The only thing we do have is a burning passion to learn and a little bit of fighting instinct. Can we avoid the pitfalls along the journey towards achieving self-growth? I hope you're ready, because you're about to watch a whole lot of nothing. Everyone meet Ulysses. Ulysses S. Kant. As his name implies, he's not particularly skilled at, well, anything, but he has a desire to learn. Now, you may be asking yourself, why is Les wandering naked in the middle of the desert? Is he on some spiritual pilgrimage or suffering from the aftermath of a wild party? No, of course not. What an absurd idea. Why would you even think that? In truth, the impoverished young man had come out here to disappear. Forever. He didn't want to die necessarily, but he felt as though his presence was a burden to everyone around him. He had lost his family to a plague a year back. Now he was the town's inconvenient responsibility. He was considered nothing, a nobody without a home, and anyone who treated him more than that were chastised for such. He was too old to be taken in by another family, and too young to know how to make it on his own. Just some kid stuck in a void of uncertainty and inexperience. And now he was here. It probably felt good in a way. All the pressures and judgments of society had now fallen off, like slipping from a pair of heavy shackles. After days of aimlessly meandering about the desert, he found an ancient lake bed. The parched flat looked like it hadn't seen water in decades, perhaps centuries even. He wasn't sure how, but from the moment he saw it, he knew this was the place he was destined to be. He would somehow find a way to transform this nothingness into somethingness. But for now, he had to focus on keeping himself alive. We needed to locate a place to set up camp. The soft sand from the lake bed was miserable to work with, but fortunately, there was regular sand along the edges, and better yet, there was even some rock flooring in certain places. Eventually, he spotted some irrigable land to the northwest. It wasn't great, but it would do for now. We planned some growing zones in what little soil was available to us, and got to work. Luckily, Les found seeds in the dung of various animals throughout his days of wandering, and the feces still contained enough moisture to aid the seeds in their initial stages of growth. And don't get any ideas, we're not going to try to drink the water out of the poop like a Man vs. Wild. Seriously, don't do that. That guy faked a lot of stuff. Les struggled to till the unyielding soil, but he was learning fast. And in time, the first signs of life, however meager, began to take root. He set up some storage zones and work areas, and even made a sleeping spot on the rough marble. It wouldn't feel great on his back, but it was better than getting sand everywhere. If there was one thing that Les knew well beyond his years, it was that balance was necessary with all things. He created a schedule for himself to help manage his time and energy. Each day would demand several hours of labor, but always ended with 2 precious hours of recreation. Discipline and persistence were keys to sustained growth. He had learned that when practicing martial arts in his youth, and though it had been many years, he still retained some of those fighting instincts. After a bit more planting, darkness soon fell upon the land, and he laid his head on the rough stone and drifted off to sleep. During the night, a pack of hyenas wandered into the area. These ferocious beasts had a notorious bite and were well-known scavengers. Les needed to be careful, else he might become their next meal. The next morning, Les rebandaged his wounds with sand. It wasn't noticeable yesterday, but he was just as injured as he appears now. He had suffered a bad fall down a rocky hill 2 days prior, and was still suffering from the painful wounds. That evening, the desert winds blew in our favor. A tortoise had wandered in from the east. One of the older hyenas caught its scent and recklessly attacked. An intense battle ensued, and for a moment it seemed like the hyena might actually lose. But in the end, the tortoise fell. Les waited patiently while the hyena ate its fill, but he was quick to gather up the remaining scraps soon after. He was the scavenger now. Without a moment to spare, he butchered the tortoise where it fell and consumed the raw turtle meat. It tasted awful, but it would keep him sated for now. We hauled up the remaining bits and studied the hyena from afar. Thanks to the tortoise, it too would soon succumb to its mortal wounds. Then we would have an even bigger meal. That was unless the other hyenas got to it first. The following morning, Les spotted the hyena writhing in pain and put it out of its misery. A few hours later, another one of the hyenas decided to help itself to his meat supply. Unfortunately, there was nothing we could do to stop it. The beast was too powerful to fight in his condition. Les fantasized about attacking the creature, but even in his daydream, it still ended poorly. The rest of the afternoon was spent planting more crops and going for the occasional walk. Each growing zone was dedicated to a specific plant. For food, there was potatoes and rice, and for utility, there was fiber corn and cotton. The seeds brought him hope for a future full of goods and food, and helped him ignore the starvation that was creeping in. Sometime later, a beautiful woman named Fola Knutson had entered the area. There's a joke in there somewhere, I'm sure of it. She was careful with her words, and likely trying to suss out why Les was out here in the first place. He explained a little bit about his situation, and he had learned just as much about her. She was from a mercenary group called the Muggers. They had quite the reputation in the region. Dangerous fighters who fought for silver, not banners. Les remembered seeing a few of them in his town, Rustburg, in the past. She said that they passed through these wastes from time to time, but she didn't mention why, and he wasn't about to ask. She told us that the group had changed her life for the better. She used to be a hostess in training, and now she was a gigolo by choice. She was an excellent fighter, a feat which was made even more impressive considering she was a genie. Her kin were known for being wise, yet delicate beings. Their genetic makeup hindered their effectiveness in battle. Les can tell just by looking at Fola that she overcame those odds. She told us to never let our circumstances of birth define who we were. Such wise words that Les repeated over and over again in his mind, determined to make them stick. She didn't have any rations left to offer us, or maybe she just wasn't willing. So Les came up with another plan. The nearby hyena would repay us for the food it stole. He had waited until night when the beast was asleep, and then snuck up on it. With all his strength, he swung down and punched the beast in the neck. The blow did nothing more than rouse the creature, and it jolted awake and launched itself at Les. He deftly dodged the bite and ran through the darkness back to where Fola was waiting. With viper-like reflexes, she whipped out her charged pistol and fired several shots into the hyena. The beast charged at her instead, but it crumbled to the ground well before reaching its target. I appreciate that, he said between gasps of air.
Watch yourself, kid,
She replied.
The first hunt is free, but the next time I'm gonna charge.
She said with a smirk and a wink. Starving, Les wasted no time tearing apart the hyena's body and eating the raw meat. Fola didn't say anything. She just watched with an unreadable face. Was she disgusted? Amused? Both? He couldn't tell for sure. Fola offered to stay the night and kept watch while we slept, in case any other predators got curious. Les was too tired to argue, and soon sleep found us once again. Early the next morning, Fola wished Les luck, even though the young man was fast asleep, and she started away across the sands. He never got to say goodbye, or even thank you. She probably preferred it that way. When he eventually woke, he spotted a dead tortoise to the south. The remaining hyena had hunted it down, and hadn't sustained any damage either. Now all that remained was a tortoise, a hyena, and a whole lot of sand. By day 4, we had finished sowing the crops, and focused instead on organizing and cleaning. He didn't have very much, but he still took pride in it. A new animal appeared to the south, this time an ostrich. The fearsome bird was likely too tough for us to take down, so it was safe for now. After tidying up the area, Les expanded his cleaning efforts to other places in the region. Sure, it wasn't necessary, but it kept his hands busy and helped stave off the boredom from his mind. Later that evening, a feral child wandered into the area. Heknaz Kaknath, a 12-year-old impid. First genies, now impids. It seems this desert is home to many exotic people. We tried to talk to them, but they ran away each time. This harsh desert was no place for a kid, but there was nothing more we could do. Maybe in time they would join us. In order to ensure that he had enough food, Les began another potato field. He also planned out a desert growing zone. He had sown some butternut squash seeds the day before, but they weren't doing well in the regular soil. That's when he recalled watching his mother growing crops in the sand when he was a boy. Some plants could only be grown in certain types of soil, and these seeds thrived in desert climates. Things were calm for a few hours. Then, a burst of activity happened all at once. Les was attacked by a raider named Dust Ox who appeared from the east. He was a gardener from a group called the Cancer Men. Wait, isn't that a Pokemon name? Dust Ox? Les was oblivious to the incoming threat and continued sowing the crops. Luckily for him, Dust Ox's expertise was in pond design, not fighting. What a horrible person for them to send out to do their bidding. Only a short time later, Les noticed a chaotic scene to the south. The tortoise was dead and partially eaten, and both Hacknaz and the hyena were badly injured. It seems that the hyena had started a fight with the tortoise, but it had lost to the shelled beast. Hacknaz, probably starving, attacked the wounded tortoise himself and won, but at a great cost. Les wanted to help, but the child wouldn't let him get near. He didn't blame them for being so distrustful, but he wished there was something he could do. The raider began his assault at sundown and made their way across the dried lake bed. Like pieces on a chessboard, the two combatants took up positions in the sand. Les noticed them as they neared, swinging a steel club wildly above their head. The attacker swung his club downward, and Les threw out a high block, which sent it wide, and immediately countered it with a punch of his own. Already he could feel the rust falling off, and he grew more confident with each dodge and punch. His opponent, despite their weapon advantage, seemed to be growing increasingly nervous. They swung their club with reckless abandon, but each attack missed worse than the one before it. Bloodied and panicked, Dust Ox roared like a feral dog and swung down with all their might. Les easily avoided the telegraphed attack and threw a devastating punch into the raider's right arm, and the powerful strike dropped the attacker to the ground. In their panic, the wounded raider crawled away, trying to put as much distance between him and the naked desert man as possible. For just a moment, Les considered letting him go, but he knew men like this didn't like to lose. He would come back for revenge, but with more firepower and friends. There was no choice. Les wouldn't let them escape. He stalked the assailant and threw a powerful axe kick down upon the man. A loud crack rang out across the area as the raider's right leg snapped in half. Dust Ox wailed in agony and was no longer crawling away. Les turned from his opponent and tried to save Hacknaz, but it was too late. The child was dead. He blamed the man for causing the entire mess, so instead of killing him, he stripped the raider of their shorts and let them suffer throughout the night. A just punishment for such a horrible person. As the morning sun began to rise over the barren desert, Les dug 2 graves in the soft sand near the fibercorn. He found himself staring down at the lifeless corpse of Dust Ox. The raider's body was contorted unnaturally, like he was trying to twist himself in 2 different directions, and his face was frozen in a final grimace of pain. Already, there was a small puddle of bile pooling beneath him, and the smell was akin to that of an overfilled latrine. The sight turned Les's stomach. This wasn't some glorious victory for him to celebrate. Sure, the raider tried to kill him, and yes, they were inadvertently responsible for the child's death, but none of that made it any easier. To Les, the most disturbing revelation was knowing that a small part of him enjoyed it. There was a darker feeling, a need for retribution, a way to lash out against all the wrongs in his life. Did he cross a line? As a student, he learned that martial arts were a shield for defending life, not a weapon to destroy it. He was justified in defending himself, yet he couldn't help but question where self-defense ended and cruelty began. He closed his eyes and dragged the corpse into one of the graves. As he piled the soft sand atop the body, he wished he could bury his guilt along with it. Each handful of earth felt heavier, laden not with sand, but with the weight of these unanswered questions. Perhaps the elements weren't his greatest adversary out here after all. Maybe it was himself. He forced away the thoughts the best he could, and soldiered on. Soon after, Les put on the man's shorts. It was better than seeing them go to waste. Being nude in the middle of nowhere didn't really make a difference, but the shorts kept most of the sand out of his more sensitive regions. He took the steel club as well. It wasn't a great weapon by any means, but it was more effective than his fists. After only a small amount of fighting, his melee skill had already reached level 2. At this rate, he would regain his former fighting ability in no time. Later that night, he buried Hacknaz next to Dustox. They were two lost souls who wound up out here like him. They were nothing alike, but now they were together in desolation. On day 7, the ostrich had tamed itself to us. Unfortunately, there was nothing for it to eat yet, and we had nothing to eat ourselves. I think you can see where this one is going. There were some new animals that wandered in as well. Man, that scorpion's really cool. I wish we could tame it. Imagine being a raider and all of a sudden a crazy man in a pair of shorts and a giant scorpion start chasing you? That's nightmare fuel right there. Another visitor arrived, this time a bounty hunter named Red Austin. Les greeted his guest as he swept away the blood into the sand. Hey there, friend. Nothing shady to see here. Just enjoy the nice crops. Afterwards, he began another sand-growing area, this time for cucumbers. 2 more members of the Muggers passed by, Ace and Steb. Oh wow, Maya Ace Portugas is an epic woman. She's an iron-willed drunken master genie. Sounds like a fun D&D character. After several days of patiently waiting, we'd finally harvested our first rice crop. This was the humble start of our sustainable food supply for the region. These crops were the genesis for what would one day become an oasis. He would transform this region into a home for lost souls like himself. Les hauled the freshly harvested rice over with the other supplies and proudly looked around at all he had. He found it ironic in a way. Over a week in an empty desert, and he already had more now than what he did back in Rustburg. The days passed by like the slow-moving ripples in the sand. Les spotted a saguaro cactus far to the east. The long hike it took to reach the plant was exhausting, but he knew the small supply of wood was well worth it. The cacti also had small fruit, but they were inedible and potentially toxic, so instead he carefully removed the seeds and placed them safely in his shorts pocket. On the return trip, he spotted the small sapling of an anima tree just north of a geothermal vent. Even at such an early stage, the wondrous sapling ignited a joyfulness from deep within him, for the tree was a clear sign that life was returning to the area once again. After his hike, Les immediately went to work planting the newly obtained saguaro seeds. Planting such seeds took a lot of patience and work, but thanks to all the practice, his plant skill was now high enough to do so. On day 12, a slave caravan from Viomala arrived. They were the first traders we had met out here, but unfortunately, we had nothing of value to offer them. So we just chatted and hung out for a while. Their leader, Siri Sintra, offered for us to tag along, but Les politely declined. I can only imagine what type of value we can bring to a group of slavers. The caravan left at first light, and to Les's surprise, they didn't try to kidnap him or rob him for his food. Instead, they had left him a gift of 72 silver. Though it was an ill-timed departure, they had left just before another raider had entered the region. It was the Cancer Men once again, this time a criminal surgeon named Tony. She was actually very dangerous despite her older age. She was a planet-known master of melee fighting. When Les saw the woman approaching, he did a double take. He recognized her from his youth. She was the master of a rival martial arts school. He remembered that she had lightning-quick strikes, but an even faster temper. She was banned from all tournaments for excessive violence, and had even attacked her own students when they dared to speak up against her. Les tried to reason with the woman. He even pleaded to her sense of authority by addressing her as sensei and master, but she merely spat when she heard those words. He needed a plan, and fast. He studied her for any weaknesses as she drew closer. There, he thought to himself, she had a slight limp, one in which she favored her left leg. That would be his main target, but first he needed some way to wear her down. Les knew he had one advantage over his attacker: speed. He rushed forward, but then he pivoted and changed course at the last second, and she gave chase, only mere steps behind. "Please," he begged her, "this is a misunderstanding."
Oh no,
she snapped back. He could almost feel her hot breath on the back of his neck.
there's no misunderstanding. You killed him. You killed Dustox.
Hearing that name again hit him as hard as a punch. The young man quickly changed direction again, this time into the soft sand of the lake bed. Each step felt like it would plunge him deeper into a sandy tomb, and it took all his concentration not to overbalance and fall. To his surprise, Tony was able to keep up with him, but she eventually started to slow down. For over an hour, he led her on a chase through the desert. He could see the sweat beginning to drench her face and clothes, but he wasn't sure how much longer it would take to tire her out. He was growing fatigued too, and needed to save some strength in case it really came down to a fight. He slowed for a moment and yelled again. It was in self-defense.
There is no defense,
She shouted back.
just different forms of offense.
She finished the statement with a crooked grin and charged at him with an unexpected burst of speed. Les let out an involuntary yelp, nearly tripping over himself as he continued to flee. She has to get tired at some point, he complained to himself. He felt a pinch in his thigh and felt a cold panic running through his body. No, not now, he pleaded as he could feel a cramp forming in his leg. He came to a sudden halt and spun towards his opponent. Then he entered into an exaggerated fighting stance, like some kind of crouching animal. But in truth, it was so he could stretch the cramp out of his leg without bringing too much attention to it. I don't want to hurt you, he declared, trying to deepen his voice as much as possible. Tony stopped a few yards away and stared at him. A slight bit of optimism grew inside. Did she really want to talk this out after all? The woman began shaking. Then, she burst into an uncontrollable fit of laughter.
This is how you choose to die?
She said between gasps, pointing at his ridiculous stance. Les snarled and straightened himself, then began stretching properly.
I appreciate the warm-up jog.
She said, cracking her neck and fists. Her tone grew deadly serious then.
But now, you die.
She let the threat hang in the air, and neither of them moved an inch. A gust of wind pushed between them, coating the combatants in a light, sandy mist. This feeling of excitement and nausea blended together in one odd emotion felt familiar to Les, and he knew what that meant. The fight was on.
Things were finally going well for once, but now our hero's past has come back to haunt him. Can Les overcome his opponent's legendary fighting ability? Will a kangaroo ever become our friend? Will the saguaro cactus actually grow? Find out on the next episode of Rimworld Z.
The two combatants stood frozen, locked in a tense stare, each daring the other to make the first move. The air felt heavy, and the sun around them faded. In this moment, it was just them and a world of sand. Les took the initiative, darting forward with his steel club aimed at Tony's arm. The blow connected, and she quickly retaliated with a swift strike of her own. The warriors then fell into a mesmerizing dance of swings and kicks, each strike barely missing the other by a hair's width. She was growing confident, too confident. Les growled in pain, and he could feel the rage building up inside. He let out a guttural roar, one from the resentful depths of all he had become. The suddenness caught the woman by surprise, and she stepped awkwardly in the sand as the man pressed forward. He swung up high, and the raider brought her club up to meet his own. But at the last second, he turned his weapon downward and drove it into Tony's left leg. The limb buckled beneath Les's club, and the bone shattered with a sickening crack. He aimed once more, this time targeting her right leg. The club connected with devastating precision, sending her collapsing into the ground. The fearsome warrior who once commanded respect was now helpless, crawling in the sand like a wounded animal. Les stood over her, breathing heavily, clutching his arm. His heart pounded in his chest, torn between mercy and something darker. He hesitated. He could walk away, let her live. Maybe she would never come back after him again. Maybe she'd remember her lesson. But deep down in that quiet, dark corner of his mind, a seed of fear blossomed into something more sinister. What if she recovered, trained, and came back for revenge? That thought, those nagging what-ifs, clouded his judgment. He wasn't a killer, not really, not the way her and Duskox were. what he was doing wasn't wrong, right? He tightened his grip on the club even more, his knuckles whitening from the pressure. It's about survival, he told himself, but he knew it wasn't just that. He was angry, afraid, hateful.
Do it, you
She was too weak to finish the sentence. He slammed his club down relentlessly. Each descent was paired with a sickening thud as he smashed apart her limbs. His body moved on its own, but in his mind, he wasn't in the desert anymore. He was back home, watching helplessly as the plague claimed his family. He remembered the way the house felt, heavy with despair, filled with the stench of death, lonely. He felt the hopelessness of the moment when the mayor forced him out of that same house because he had no means to pay for it. That overwhelming sense of loss, the powerlessness to stop the world from crumbling around him, it was all there. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the sweat and sand, but he kept swinging. "No!" he screamed, seeing flashes of his parents. "No!" he cried louder, remembering the disease and suffering. With every bone he shattered, with every scream that tore from his throat, he wasn't just fighting Tony. He was fighting his past, the pain, the sadness. Les came to once he heard a loud splashing sound, like someone throwing a stone into water. Only when he looked down, he realized that it was the sickening splatter of Tony's head beneath his club. Her body was destroyed beyond recognition. He could barely distinguish it from an animal carcass that was mutilated by buzzards. "I'm sorry," Les whispered through gritted teeth. He wasn't sure if the apology was for Tony, his family, or for the boy he used to be. As the new sun rose over the horizon, Les diligently sowed more saguaro cacti. His hands were digging through the sand, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the past few days. He had more now than he did just a week ago. His experience and skills were growing in leaps and bounds, yet he couldn't drive up enough emotion to feel happy or, well, anything. How could he reconcile the man he's becoming with who he once was? However, he felt a smile crease his face as he thought back to one of his old martial arts lessons. Master Carter had promised them that they would only need to do one squat, just one, but there was a catch. They needed to hold that squat till the shadow of the post hit the cactus. That was hard enough on its own, but then their sensei smiled. They were all too familiar with that mischievous grin. He placed a bucket of water down in front of each of them and told them that they would have to balance it on their head while they were squatting. Every student who stood or spilt the water would have to do extra cleaning throughout the week and would need to do 1,000 knuckle push-ups. He gave a deep philosophical meaning for it, explaining that each droplet of water represented their inner strength and resolve. He spoke about overcoming internal hurdles and that true mastery meant not only controlling one's body, but also their mind. Most importantly, he promised them a generous reward if they can all make it until the end. As the hours stretched on, the kids trembled beneath the weight of their held squat, combined with the buckets of water placed precariously atop their heads. Stinging sweat dripped into their eyes, and small flies bit at their skin. Every so often, Master Carter paced between them and chimed in with some type of motivational saying. He would say random things, like, "Pain is weakness, leaving the body. Only the strong survive. When life gives you lemons, don't make lemonade. Make life take the lemons back." Les could hear his friend Yukiko's soft sobs as they echoed through the stifling heat. His own muscles cried out for relief just as much. He risked a glance in her direction and held his breath as the weight of the bucket shifted slightly. Somehow, it remained balanced. It was clear that she was crying more in frustration than in pain. Her internal battle between mind and body was fully displayed on her face, like a fight on a rosy red field during a rainstorm. Seeing her struggle sparked something deep within him. "You've got this, Yukiko," he muttered through gritted teeth. She looked over, tears streaking her flushed face, and despite the pain, she nodded in appreciation. From the other side, their friend Yu, equally drenched in sweat, chimed in.
Yeah, don't let Master win.
He let out a strained laugh, which sent a ripple through the group. The kids then began to exchange encouragements, each finding a well of strength from the other's words. Yukiko took a deep, steadying breath to tighten her resolve, and the shaking in her legs seemed to calm. One by one, the kids focused on each other rather than their own pain, and their voices grew louder in solidarity. Their master, who had been quietly pacing back and forth, paused and watched in silence as his students, once on the verge of collapse, held their ground. When the shadow of the post finally touched the cactus, none of the students moved an inch. Master Carter grinned wide and jokingly declared, "Oh, you must like doing these, huh?" As soon as those words left his lips, the students groaned and collapsed in unison. Several bystanders who had stopped to watch the students began to clap and cheer at the great display of endurance. "You've done it. I'm proud of each of you," the master stated. "Now you can see true strength lies not just in yourself, but in lifting up each other as well." The students laughed at one another as they tried to stand up on numb legs. Les could hardly feel his either, but the pain no longer mattered. They had made it, and that sense of accomplishment they shared overrode any discomfort they experienced along the way. Master Carter stepped forward and gave them all a solemn nod. "As promised," he said, trying to remain serious, "you've earned a special reward." The kids perked up, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. But then, with a playful glint in his eyes, the master said, "You now only need to do 100 push-ups instead of 1,000. A choir of groans and laughter followed, and Les laughed so hard that he snapped himself out of his daydream. "Oh man," he said, choking back the tears that were pooling in his eyes. He tilted his head back and watched the fluffy white clouds float lazily above him. "I miss you guys," he said, allowing the dam of tears to burst forward. "I miss all of you, even you, Master Carter." Sometime later, he noticed another wild cactus had grown tall enough to be harvested, and he spotted a herd of zebras approaching from the west. It was nice to see the creatures, especially in such an unfriendly region like this. That evening, a flash of light tore across the sky, as if somebody had raked a knife across a sunset painting. A transport pod crashed down on the far side of the lake bed. It took Les the better part of an hour to locate it. When he did, he found a young woman lying in the sand next to the wreckage. Les could see that she was injured, but still breathing. She opened her eyes for just a moment and weakly whispered that her name was Steel. Les carefully placed the woman on the marble ground and began tending to her wounds. She was suffering from blood loss due to a bad scratch on her leg and a cracked ribcage. Suddenly, one of the zebras grew maddened and charged at them. Exhausted and still mentally fatigued from his encounter with Tony, Les was hardly able to register the threat before the creature was atop them. He battled the beast above Steele's unconscious body. His arms were heavy as if filled with lead, and each movement was sluggish and painful. The zebra landed a powerful blow on his spine, and the mind-shattering pain nearly caused him to faint. He started to black out, and he could feel another uncontrollable fit of rage boiling over inside. One of the beast's hooves thundered into the ground, nearly crushing the woman's skull. In that moment, his rage fell away and was replaced with concern, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Seeing her lying helplessly beneath him forced him to see beyond his own pain. He was reminded again of his friends, the buckets of water, of who he used to be. The zebra reared and kicked down even harder. It would have hit her, but Les knocked away the beast's leg just in time. He let out a savage growl and tapped into a reserve of strength and energy that had laid dormant in him for years, a primal need to protect. He dodged an attack and followed it quickly with one of his own. With each strike, the darkness that once clouded his mind lifted. The bitterness, the anger, it all melted away, replaced by something purer. Finally, with a ragged shout, he delivered the killing blow, and the zebra collapsed at his feet. Les dropped to his knees, and his club became more of a cane. Every ounce of energy was drained from his body. His muscles screamed, his head spun, but inside he felt free. For the first time since losing his family, he could feel the weight fall from his shoulders. He gazed down at Steel and whispered, "I've got you. You're safe now." Her reply came in restful snores, and fortunately, her leg stopped bleeding. "You've done it," he heard a familiar voice say proudly behind him. he looked around, half expectantly to see Master Carter, but there was nothing there, only the abyssal dark of the endless desert. "Thank you, Master," he said, bowing down on his knees. He stayed there for a time, and eventually mended his wounds before falling asleep. When Les awoke, he patched up Steele's minor injuries and fed her some rice. Then he laid back down for some more rest. They exchanged a few words and learned each other's names. Steele commented on his wounds and the dead zebra, but Les barely registered the words. Her soft voice knocked him out quicker than any strike ever could. She was thankful for his help, so much so that she decided to stay. Maybe it was surviving the crash, the chaotic zebra attack, or maybe she didn't really have any other options. But either way, she was his roommate now. Now that we had another colonist, it was time to give our little group a name. We named our faction the Less Fortunates, after its founder, and henceforth, our settlement will be known as the Barren Bay Basin, a humble home with humble beginnings. Early the next morning, Les butchered the zebra and fed the warm meat to Steele. It tasted horrible, but his father once told him that eating raw meat provided oneself with the strength of the animal. There was no evidence that it worked, of course, but the older generation swore by it. Steele was back on her feet by first light, and just for a moment, Les thought the raw meat actually worked. He went to make a joke about it, but then he cut himself short when he saw that she was actually wandering around sadly, staring at the sand. He gave her the space that she needed and tended to the crops instead. It would take her some time to adjust to this new life, but things would eventually get better for them. They can only go up from here. Les harvested copious amounts of wood, rice, and potatoes. There was one problem though. The zebra herd was helping themselves to our cotton and the crops that we picked. Once again, Les thought about taking matters into his own hands, but one zebra had given him enough of a fight, and he didn't want to know what it was like to fight several at once. For now, all he could do was enjoy their natural beauty and appreciate the fact that life was returning to this part of the desert. The next morning, Les worked vigorously to harvest what little cotton he could, since the wildlife seemed so fond of it. He thought about asking Steele for help, but she was still recovering from her mental break, so he thought it best to let her sleep. He studied the landscape and realized that there were no predators anywhere in sight. If he didn't step up, herbivores would devastate their crops. This, of course, would potentially ruin their settlement and the revitalization project along with it. He decided to hunt the ostrich since it was alone. The oversized bird didn't go down without a fight, and it scratched up his neck and face. The wounds weren't serious, but they served as a reminder that he needed to be more careful. Later, Steele offered to help with the crops, and Les hesitated at first. He wasn't used to accepting help, though eventually he relented. After working side by side, he realized how much lighter the burden felt. It had been so long since he had anyone to share anything with, and it was a refreshing change. That night, Steele suggested to Les that they should use the newly acquired wood to construct a small cabin. Having spent over a year sleeping outside or sneaking into people's sheds, he hadn't even thought about that. He admitted to not being much of a builder, but Steele was confident that she can build it since she worked construction with her father since she was a girl. They started the project together, with Steele taking the lead, and before long, a humble cabin began to take shape. Steele finished the cabin in the morning. It was a small but solid structure that immediately made their camp feel more like a home. They managed to harvest the cucumbers and set up a potato storage zone outside for the zebras to keep them from eating the other crops. Steele came up with a great idea. She built a wooden hoopstone ring to give them some much needed entertainment. They spent the day working together and gabbing about different topics, and by the afternoon, they were beginning to consider each other as friends. Later, Les tried his hand at hoopstone, but he nearly hit Steele in the head with one of the rocks. Man, that was close. Steele took a turn later on when Les was asleep. As she played, her mind wandered back to her old life, her parents, the warmth and safety of home. She missed them dearly. Life had been good to her, almost too good. Her biggest worries used to be whether her art would impress her teachers or if she was living up to the expectations of her peers. She knew how fortunate she was, even now. Somehow, in this vast, barren desert, she had crash-landed in the one spot where a kind man was living and growing food. Still, part of her wished she could jump back in her drop pod and return home, where things were simple. She forced the thought away, shaking her head. No, that's why she left in the first place. She needed to be here. She had to prove, if only to herself, that she could stand on her own, succeed by her own merit, not just because of her parents' help. She hoped that the note she left behind would serve as a proper goodbye, but deep down, she knew her departure was about more than leaving them. It was about finding herself. Over time, Les and Steele grew more comfortable with each other. They learned how to work in sync, like dancers finding their rhythm together. They shared laughs, games, and even a friendly competition when Steele challenged Les to a poncho making contest. Steele was up first, and her poncho turned out to be awful. And then Les, thinking he could do better, made one just as bad. They both laughed at the mess they created and joked how their ponchos would be great for an ugly Christmas sweater party. Time passed like the desert winds, slow but steady, shifting the sands bit by bit. Les stood amidst it all, reflecting on how strange life had become. He always wanted something normal, a family, a home, a life that made sense. But what did normal even mean anymore? The longer he survived out here, the more he realized that life didn't fit into a perfectly shaped box. It was unpredictable. It reminded him of a quote that used to hang in his old dojo. Empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Some legendary warrior had said that, though he only knew them by their initials, BL. Back then, they were just words on a wall, but now they actually resonated with him. Les didn't choose this fate. He hadn't asked for any of this, but he adapted because life demanded it. Life wasn't always about reacting, though. Sometimes it called for action. Steele chose to walk away from a comfortable existence for something harder. She had felt some deep, unshakable pull to challenge herself, to grow as an individual. It was a kind of strength Les admired, but didn't fully understand. Maybe in time he would. A pair of nomads showed up to the settlement, Urka and Purple. They asked the companions if they can shelter with them for a few days, since they recently lost their home in a flash storm. Even though they were low on food, they couldn't turn away people in need. Les and Steele welcomed them in, but let's just say these two were interesting. Urka, the older of the two, was internally conflicted. She was a psychopath who's great at fighting, but also squeamish and delicate. Purple, on the other hand, he kinda just sucked as a person. He was a jealous slowpoke with an annoying voice, and he loved to brag about how he trolled people whenever possible. Les put them to work immediately on some of the easier growing zones, while he focused on planting Drago trees. That evening, the group faced a dilemma. With food supplies running low, they needed to hunt zebras, but Les was hesitant. He wanted to preserve life as much as possible, and the zebras represented that. After a vote, the group agreed to hunt only 3 of them. The other 2, male and female, would go unharmed so they can continue on. With a plan in place, they set off into the night. Like their caveman ancestors from the ancient past, the group ambushed their prey and beat them with their clubs and knives. The first 2 zebras went down with relative ease, but when they attacked the third one, it sparked the animal's herd instinct, and a bloody brawl ensued. Hoof and club clashed in an epic battle atop the sands. In the end, the group was battered, but victorious. Urka got the worst of it. Her nose was shattered, and her left ear was ripped off completely, but overall, not too bad. Urka looks like a stereotypical 80s slasher, standing there with the bloody knife. Actually, so does Purple, though he gives off more of a 60s or 70s Manson vibe. What type of people did we let into our home? After a rough night, everyone was exhausted. Surprisingly, most of the zebras were still alive. Urka began butchering one of them, but then she realized how injured she was and went back to rest. Purple, being the miserable person that he is, went into a sad wander. More than likely, he was just trying to get out of doing work. The next few days were pretty calm, mostly spent on routine work like harvesting and crafting. With fall creeping in, the group knew they had to prepare for the winter. Despite being in the desert, they were still in a rather temperate part of the world, and it could even drop into the single digits during the colder months. Everyone had their own internal struggles to deal with, most of all, Urka. Her injuries healed quickly, but she was still dealing with some heart issues and a severe drug problem. She was tough, no doubt about that, but every time she lit up another smoke leaf joint, Les caught a glimpse of something in her eyes. Something fragile, perhaps fear or loneliness. We also added an addition to the cabin to make it feel a bit less cramped. We also experimented with planting some cacti and agave further to the south, hoping the growth would attract more wildlife. At some point, another raider from the Cancer Men attacked. Les severely beat him and threw gravel in his eyes. They keep sending single raiders our way. It's almost like they're trying to sacrifice unwanted people from their faction. Either that, or they're just incompetent. Yeah, it's probably the latter. Les and Steele kept a close eye on Purple. Urka had informed them earlier that he hadn't left her side since their settlement fell, like some kind of lost dog. According to her, the only person that actually liked him was his mother. He was still in his own world, retreating deeper into whatever sadness had gripped him. On the 3rd of September, Les learned that the visitors were keeping a secret from him. They were both good researchers. They told him of how important knowledge was in their former colony, and though their settlement was lost, they still had some of the charred records from their archives. Together, the group decided to begin research on basic furniture. As the name implies, this would give them access to the basic furnishings of a home, especially beds, something they were sorely lacking. They created a study corner to read and discuss ideas. Even Purple was beginning to show some personality, though his voice was still a bit grating. While the others focused mainly on their research, Les continued to study the nature around him. The zebras were healing nicely, and the crops were doing okay, though they were starting to show signs of wilting due to the changing seasons. Thanks to this greater understanding, he reached a level 10 plant skill. A day later, Urka and Purple packed up their things and said their goodbyes. They thanked their hosts for taking them in, and promised to never forget about their hospitality. When they left, Steele quipped about how a small part of her would miss Purple's annoying voice, and Les agreed. He admitted that he had grown fond of them. Their appearance and demeanor made them unlikable at first, but once they got to know the pair, they turned out to be pretty decent people. Now it was just him and Steele once again, back in their little green slice of home in the middle of nowhere. Just when things were calming down, Steele noticed two large shapes across the lake bed. A pair of thrombos entered the area. It appeared to be a father and son duo. Seeing the majestic beasts lifted their spirits greatly and reinforced to them that nature was beginning to return. It would seem that both Steele and Les are interested in taking their friendship to the next level. They kept awkwardly complimenting each other, but their attempts at flirting went over each other's heads. Steele tried to woo Les by complimenting his open-mindedness, but he rejected the advance without even realizing it. Soon after, Les tried to attract Steele by subtly complimenting her hopes and dreams, but she inadvertently turned him down. After their failed flirting attempts, the conversation naturally drifted into taming reindeer. The experiment with the agave and cacti to the south seems to have worked. The thrombos were gorging themselves on it. For some reason, it was only the father thrombo eating, and the son seemed content. This one is just being a stereotypical dad. The obnoxious thrombo dad continued picking at its buffet of options. This time, it was eating our trees. Why, man? Why the trees? When the pair weren't admiring the nature, they were hard at work, researching and cooking. After a few more days of playful banter and awkward eye contact, Steele tried again to romance Les. This time, she joked about drunkenness. Somehow, he managed to pick up on the joke's subtle romantic undertones, and they became new lovers. The 10th of September was a day of firsts for the settlement. Traders from the Grey Hill Nation arrived. Finally, our first actual traders. They were led by Lerno the Butcher. He seemed to run a pretty organized crew. They all wore toques. Well, except for the huntsman, but maybe they were a special rank or something. we sold them the drugs we collected from the raiders, and then Steele made a butchering table. This was officially the first real piece of furniture for the settlement. The following morning, we received a gift from the sky, a uranium meteorite smashed down to the south. Steele loved to mine things, and she excitedly got to work with her pickaxe. However, we soon learned that the exotic space rock contained a toxic substance, one which blighted the nearby rice. The pair rushed into action and cut down the diseased crops before they can affect any of the others. More animals entered the region from the south, this time lions. Wait, lions? With any luck, they'll just stay down there and eventually wander away. A cluster of cargo pods crashed down just north of the settlement. It's just a bunch of lettuce. Between that and the butternut squash, the pair would be eating a lot of salad over the next few days. Too bad lions don't like lettuce. That evening, a new enemy appeared from the north. A pigskin named Melissa Archer. Quite a fitting name for someone with her shooting capabilities. Les and Steele saw her approaching and quickly devised a plan. They would flank her from behind the saguaro cactus and pray that they didn't get shot. It seemed like a solid enough plan. Thankfully, the raider whiffed all of her shots, probably due to the pressure of seeing two people charging recklessly at her. They closed the distance fast, and the companions made short work of her in melee combat. She dropped due to a crack wound. That's a funny name for an injury. Steele took the raider's revolver for herself. Then she and Les exchanged a knowing look, and she walked back to the cabin. Just keep watching the stars, Les said to Lissa as the woman struggled to breathe. He swung his club down upon her head and ended the woman's suffering. He ran the dead raider's pockets and found a transponder. On it was an encoded message from the Fallen Empire. They wanted to test out a new weapon, one which affects the weather itself. Intrigued, Les asked for more details. And somebody answered. A person named Pusky informed them that the test would cover the designated area in a rainy thunderstorm for 17 days, but in return, they would send them a gift of their choice. Les was momentarily stunned. He wasn't sure if fate was real, but he believed it wholeheartedly in that moment. What were the odds that that specific raider would have attacked them? One raider with the transponder, a key to opening up the floodgates in the sky. Yes, he thought. This was the answer. This was the missing ingredient to revitalizing the entire region. He looked over at the dried lake bed. He would wake that sleeping giant once again. Husky coughed into the mic, interrupting his train of thought, and he insisted that Les make a decision. He agreed to the terms, and he chose his reward, a brand new telescope. He sent the agent their coordinates, and a minute later, a package arrived at their door. Man, the Fallen Empire is actually better than Amazon. He went back inside just as the rain started and nudged Steele to wake up. He explained everything that had just happened, and when she asked why he chose the telescope of all things, he smiled and said that he did it for her. Now she can look up at her family anytime she wants. Well, once the rain stopped, of course. Tears erupted from her face before he even finished the sentence. Oh no, he thought. Did he say something hurtful? She wrapped him in a tight hug a second later and thanked him. The pair fell asleep in each other's arms, and for the first time in a long while, everything in their lives felt right. Early in the morning, while the couple were asleep, an iguana self-tamed to them. Great, now we can practice on training animals. As the forest, stormy weather moved over the land, the oppressive sun was replaced by dark, low-hanging clouds. The life-giving rains that have forsaken this land for so long had finally returned, though by unnatural means. The calming waters washed away their past, both figuratively and literally, and it washed away all the blood. In order to capture as much rain as possible, Les dug several deep holes in the lake bed. To his surprise, while he was digging, he discovered spouts of water hidden in some type of natural reservoir that was lying dormant beneath several feet of soft sand. Over the next few days, the water continued to collect across the lake bed. At first, it appeared like small puddles, but over time, those puddles merged into ponds, and those ponds continued to grow and connect. At some point, chunks of spacecraft fell from the sky, providing the pair with much needed steel. No, not that steel. On day 38, another person fell from the sky, a lore keeper named Vernon. He's a bit clumsy, but other than that, he's a fantastic colonist. His skills are going to be great for our revitalization project as well. On the first day of Decemberary, Vernon decided to join the group. Now there's one more less fortunate. Les then received a call over the radio from Heracus Pastos. He asked for some help regarding scrappers from the Squids of Cash. That's a pretty good name for a gang. He asked Les to draw the gang's attention away from their caravans, and in return, they would offer him an honorable title. He agreed to the terms and used his Kodak to radio one of the local scrappers in the area. Her name was Panna the Lonely. The Empire had given us some intel about her before the call. She was steadfast in her ways and unwaveringly loyal to her cause, so there would be no talking her out of her position. Knowing this, Les resorted to the tactics he learned on the schoolyard as a kid. He teased her about her age and insulted her mother. The woman was enraged and promised that he would pay for such insults. So it seems that the plan had worked. The following morning, the group waited anxiously for the gang to arrive, but they never did. While they scouted the area, they studied the lions down in the south. However, they were both laying bloodied on the ground. After a closer look, it was determined that the beast had gotten into a fight and killed each other. That's both tragic and wonderful at the same time. Well, that takes care of that problem then. Steele and Les hauled the dead lions up together and talked about life. Despite the rainy mood, there was plenty to be happy about. When they returned home, Les fell to one knee. At first, Steele thought he was hurt and rushed to his aid, but that is when she saw the homemade wooden ring he was holding in his hand. He confessed his love to her and said that he wanted them to spend their life together. Steele broke down crying and accepted his proposal. She couldn't wait to become Steele S. Cant. After the proposal, Les set up the telescope, and both him and Steele stared into it for hours. They looked up at the stars, peeking through the gaps in the storm clouds whenever possible. The following afternoon, they were raided by the Squids of Cash. It was Panna, the Lonely, finally arriving to make good on her threat. She was a great shot, and she carried a lever-action rifle. She approached from the north, from behind the cover of the cacti field. Vernon was the first to spot her. He charged at the woman with his sword, but she eventually landed a shot on the man, and he retreated back inside. Seeing her new companion in trouble, Steele took cover behind another cacti and fired upon the woman with her revolver, but Panna proved to be an even deadlier shot. Steele got hit in the torso, and she too ran for the safety of the cabin, and was luckily able to elude the attacker's follow-up shots. Fortunately, the woman didn't pursue her wounded victims. Instead, she waited outside, ready to kill her true target, the man who greatly insulted her and her mother. And her wish came true nearly an hour later when Les returned home, whistling some sort of pleasant tune. He was shocked to find his fiancée bleeding on the ground, with a bloodied Vernon tending to her wound. He informed Les about their attacker and warned him that she was a dangerous shot. Seeing his future wife and his new companion in such a state tapped into that ferocious side of him once more. But this time, Les was able to cage that demon within and funnel that rage-filled energy into a heightened state of focus. He calmly walked out the door and studied the northern horizon until he spotted his target. Steele protested as Les was leaving, and she shoved Vernon away just as he finished stitching up her torso. The man pleaded with her to rest as she rushed for the door, but she was having none of it. Les continued to move in a calm, meditative-like state, his focus never breaking from Panna. He weaved himself methodically around the cacti, like a viper preparing to ambush its prey. The raider could only catch glimpses of him before he would vanish back behind cover. Many tense heartbeats passed by, each time she was growing increasingly nervous. Mere seconds later, the man was upon her, as if he had just materialized from the nearest cactus. She was only able to fire one shot, just one, but unfortunately for her, that was the only chance she would get against this foe. Les charged her with a flurry of blows, but the raider's strong plate armor shielded her from the brunt of the damage. A small struggle then ensued, with Panna trying to use her rifle as an improvised club. As the struggle was nearing its end, Les heard a shot from behind, and a bullet drove through the armor and into the woman's side. Steele was there, revolver in hand, her face locked in a grimace of pain and anger. Panna collapsed to the ground, and the couple just stared at one another, trying to gauge how the other was feeling. But before they could share a word, another raider entered the area. Denis the Cautious. Steele spotted them first and shouted a warning to the group. She quickly exchanged her revolver for Panna's lever-action rifle. Vernon was quick to follow suit, and he scooped up the revolver. With some new weapons in hand, the group went on the offensive. Steele provided Les with cover fire, while he quickly crossed the open ground with Vernon close behind. The trio flanked their attacker, and within minutes, the raider was dead. Once again, Les and Steele exchanged a concerned look. The rifle in Steele's hands was clearly shaking, and without saying a word, Les walked over and wrapped her in a hug and reminded her that everything was okay. He repeated the words back to her that he said to himself the first time that he took a life, but he knew, of course, that it didn't make it any easier. Only time and love really would. As the winter weather pressed on, their plants died off in rapid succession, but the campfire inside kept them warm. Steele's gunshot wound became infected, and Les treated her as best he could. The weather was cold and rainy, but the life-giving waters continued to pool and brought in new plant life throughout the region. The following morning, Steele's infection grew extreme, and Les, overwhelmed with concern, never left her side. Vernon did the best he could and mended her whenever possible, and thankfully, his medical prowess paid off and helped her pull through the extreme infection. Man, that was a close one. With Steele on the mend, Les thought he could relax a bit. Another transport pod crashed down, this time right next to their home. A woman named Yumiko Hensley from the Purple Basin Bandits. She was bleeding from a fatal gunshot wound to the neck and had only 4 hours to live. They decided that they would try to save her. Steele suggested that they build a holding cell and sketched out a rough blueprint. The trio rushed into action and constructed a simple room. Vernon hauled some of the supplies. Then he broke off and began patching up the woman's wounds. His main focus was on stopping the bleeding in her neck. Their timing was perfectly in sync, and by the time they finished building the holding cell, Vernon had finished healing Hensley. Perhaps too well, as she woke up and started crawling aggressively towards him. They searched the woman and found an ID badge. On the back of it was a list of her skills. It turned out that she was an accomplished chef and a fantastic artist. Together, the colonists would try to convince her to abandon her way of life, let go of the past. They would show her that there was a greater purpose here in the desert. It would take some time, no doubt, but they had plenty of that. Besides, Hensley had a nasty go juice addiction to kick, and it was better that she was imprisoned when she went through that. And a coyote tried hunting their iguana, Imp, for food. Seeing one of their own in danger, they rallied to the reptile's defense and dropped the coyote. But Vernon had a soft spot for the dog, and he worked valiantly to save it. They received an extortion message from a faction called Osheti, but Les refused to negotiate with terrorists. A group of Yatakan from Osheti attacked from the south. It was a lady named Beatit Honan. It took her a long time to reach the settlement, and when she did, she was destroyed immediately. Instead of burying her, Vernon suggested that they leave the body out for a few days for the coyote to eat. That's a great idea. Eventually, the group finished their research on basic furniture and began research on terraforming, another major key that would be used to revitalize the region. On the 6th of December, Les received an unexpected call on his Kodak. His friends Urka and Purple were calling in from their new settlement. Luckily, Purple's parents were still alive, and they, along with a few other people, had started a new colony not far from their old one. Now they were back on their feet, and they wanted to give them a proper thank you. And after getting the coordinates, they sent over a masterwork wooden meditation throne. That's a very generous gift. On the 8th of December, the coyote had self-tamed. It must have been won over by Vernon's kindness, and in honor of the event, we named her Luna Furiosa, because it just sounds really cool. And the good luck didn't stop there. A cluster of cargo pods fell from the sky. Fine grilled food. It was a special type of food that granted a nice mood boost and reduced hunger, but it lost its effectiveness if it didn't stay frozen. Unfortunately, that would be quite a problem for us. The hours passed by, collecting slowly into days, similar to how the droplets of rain gathered together into larger pools of water. The arrival of each sunrise brought with it something different. Sometimes it gave our friends new ideas, such as planting rye, and funny jokes. Other times, it brought them interesting creatures, like camels and ducks. Wait, ducks? They researched and worked and played. There were times of labor and times for rest, times for anger and times for love. But nothing great could happen without making the necessary sacrifices along the way. And as such, on day 52, the ducks needed to be reevaluated. Sure, they were good at producing eggs and giving us animal training practice, but the little monsters were eating us dry. Food was terribly low. Actually, it was non-existent. Some tough choices needed to be made. We slaughtered the 2 oldest male ducks. That left us with 2 others, plenty enough to repopulate with. We also hunted down the oldest camel. We didn't have any food to tame them anyway. Les hated the idea of killing these animals, but he understood that their bad food planning had led them here, and adjustments would need to be made going forward. Eventually, the forest weather had ended, and things had finally calmed in the desert again. The lake bed, once barren, was now full of water, and the nearby land was showing signs of life. Time continued to pass, and so did our struggle for food. The group organized and made plans on how they would prevent this going forward, and they did so mainly by consulting the prisoner, Hensley. Vernon had been picking her mind about all the things she knew about cooking, and she knew a great deal about food preservation as well. Maybe in time she would help them even more, but right now she was battling some severe withdrawal demons. Unfortunately, they had to hunt another camel throughout the revitalized lake, and they had to let the ducks nearly starve, only feeding the ones who most desperately needed food. Though there were still times when their spirits were lifted, such as when they took the time to admire the anima tree, or when a random migration of boom bats came through the area. Just look at how cute the little things are. They learned from their mistakes and made new discoveries. They often looked ahead toward their future, but every now and then, one of them looked up at their past. Eventually, things fell into a peaceful rhythm. Then, on the 6th of April-May, nearly 1 full year since Les had started his journey, he and Steele had gotten married. Vernon oversaw the event. He said some kind words about loving each other, and he had them exchange lifelong vows. During the celebration, they wandered around outside and playfully joked about breakfast and fighting hawks. A few days later, the group had finally convinced Hensley to join them, bringing the less fortunates up to 4. She informed them that she wanted to change her name. She would like to be called by her last name, Yumiko, going forward, as a way to fully signify her change. A Garanlan pod had sprouted, symbolizing just how far the region had recovered. Les brought the pod back home, and Vernon explained that it would grow into a Garanlan tree, and that it would create dryads, little nature spirits that could help heal and regrow the land. To Les, it became obvious that this seed was the final key to the revitalization project. These creatures can take up mending the land and rebuilding it, even without them needing to be present. Now he would only need to find a place to plant it. But where? It would seem that love is in the air. Vernon, the smooth talker that he is, flirted with Yumiko by subtly complimenting her emotional stability. And she found that to be very romantic. Now they're lovers. This is great. On day 66, they finished research on terraforming, and the group went to work right away, planning out how they would transform the surrounding land. Les took time to find a proper place for the Garanlan tree, and he planted it down in the sand just south of the settlement. As he did so, he could feel the seedling calling out to him, and he saw a resting spirit within the tiny plant. He couldn't hear it, but he could feel it speaking to him, somehow communicating with him from a deeper emotional level. Without understanding exactly why, he began pruning the tree. He closed his eyes and allowed the emotional guidance to take control. He saw the spirits of several different dryads circling around him, each with their own unique features and abilities. He felt a bond beginning to build with one of them, one which seemed most adept at helping bring life back to the desert. A surge of Drudaic energy rushed into his body and washed back out into the tree. The surge of energy was both calming and invigorating all at once, and when he opened his eyes, the pruning had been completed. He knew that he would need to come back and trim the tree again at least a few more times, but this was the start of a special connection. After some downtime, Steel had planned another expansion for their settlements and began building it just a few spaces north. For a time, things fell into a pattern of excitement and boredom. Some days they were attacked by bandits, and other days they were working and relaxing. All the while, everyone worked towards both their collective and personal goals. Steel continued to express her creativity by building a barn. Yumiko experimented with new recipes. Vernon continued to research new ways on how to improve the colony. And Les grew to level 14 in plants, officially making him a master planter. Unlike other people, he found the practice of farming to be almost meditative. Every day, he would tend to the crops and whisper words of positivity to each one he looked over. He felt a oneness with them, and felt as they grew, so did he. He loved seeing something so insignificant as a seed grow into a hardy, life-giving plant. On day 72, the hay was finally ready to be harvested. Not only did it make for good animal feed, but it also gave Steel extra material to build with. She found a purpose for it right away and used it as flooring for the small barn. The straw would help keep the filth to a minimum, which was helpful with so many animals. The colonists found life together pleasant. It was an interesting mix of youth and experience. They learned a lot from each other and enjoyed spending time together, though at times sharing a dorm got a bit awkward. Life continued to improve throughout the region as well. Plants were becoming more abundant, as were the animals. And though it was no longer raining, the natural reservoir of water Les found beneath the lake seemed to feed it enough to maintain the water levels, despite natural evaporation. All of this growth, all of these thoughts about life, made Steel a bit nervous, and she found herself peering into the telescope more frequently than usual. Over a week ago, she had finally spotted the crab-shaped constellation known as Kingler, and she knew that her home ship was approximately in that direction. But no matter how hard she stared up into the sky, she never saw her ship. For over half a year, she had been gone. So much has changed since that time. She was no longer some little girl on a ship. She was a woman of the desert. She had gained many skills and had fought and killed. But most of all, she had fallen in love and had married a wonderful man. She smiled to herself when she thought of her new last name. Steel shook her head. If things were so right, then why was she now yearning for her old life? Her parents, her friends? That question was weighing heavily on her mind. She felt that nervous little feeling again, the butterflies that raced throughout her stomach. A strange balance between giddiness and nausea. She was sick, she knew that. She must have caught a parasite or something, because every morning for the past few days she had been throwing up. Thankfully, Les seemed to elude whatever bug she had. He was great at avoiding danger after all, but she didn't want to tell him. She knew he would worry like crazy. He would probably never leave her side again. It would go away on its own, she thought to herself. She peered once again into the telescope, staring intently at the Kingler constellation, and for no reason at all, sadness had washed over her. After nearly another full day of trimming, Les felt his connection with the Goronlin tree grow significantly. And that night, while everyone was resting, a dryad cocoon formed nearby. As a thank you for taking her in, Yumiko decided to throw a desert party. There wasn't much in the way of food or entertainment, but it was a nice break from their daily routine. They discussed many topics, and her and Steel came up with a great idea. They wanted to make the settlement feel more homely. So Yumiko helped design some furniture, and Steel crafted a table and chairs. On day 76, the group began their long-awaited terraforming project. They would slowly begin changing over the area nearest to them, and after that, the plan was to continue expanding out in every direction, though they would purposely leave some spots as desert terrain, as to not destroy the habitat of the few creatures that called this place home. The ducks laid a ton of eggs in the boxes that Steel had made for them, so now there would soon be a lot of ducks, like a duck ton of ducks. Get it? A duck ton? Not all the animals were doing well. Luna Furiosa had been acting more feral as of late. Despite self-taming, it would seem that even Vernon, with his prowess for creatures, doesn't have enough pet skill to keep her domesticated. He warned the group to keep a close eye on her, in case she began to turn. Poor Luna, she sounds like some kind of zombie or something like that. Speaking of zombies, The next day, a group of shambling corpses wandered right next to our house. They were being led by some massive skeletal gore hulk. Who knows why there's a group of fiends wandering about the desert, but this major threat needed to be dealt with. As they had practiced many times before, the group moved in unison and focused their fire on the nearest target, while Les stayed crouched in front of them, ready to strike if any of the monsters got too close. The first shambler took a lot of damage before going down, but luckily, it didn't draw the attention of the others. They targeted the gore hulk next. Even from this distance, its enormous girth and pungent smell made them hesitate. Steel took the first shot with her lever-action rifle. For several minutes, they fired into the relentless abomination until it collapsed into a pile of bones. The death of their leader seemed to spur on the other monsters. The fight got a bit messy, but thanks to their combined effort, they eliminated the monsters in short time. Les got scratched on his right foot and leg, and the others all looked at him nervously. Then, they reflexively looked back at Vernon, the most medically trained in the group. Vernon bent down and examined his leg. After some time, he said,
"We need to take the leg, Les. I'm sorry."
"Wait, what?" he began to protest. Steel and Yumiko both yelped.
"No, just messing with you. Don't worry, it's not contagious."
They all shared a laugh, and the fighting made them hungry, except for Les. Life continued to enter the region in many ways. The duck eggs had hatched, and now many, many ducklings were running around. The group was also hard at work, replacing poor soil with fresh, rich soil that would help plants grow faster. Steel, however, was still distracted from all of it. That sick, fluttery feeling in her stomach had worsened by the day, and today, she couldn't even hide it. She winced while playing a game of hoopstone with Vernon, and the man asked her what was wrong. She tried to brush it off as some type of food poisoning, but the wise man was having none of that.
"Stand up straight,"
he said to her, in a tone that a father would use on his sick child. Steel rolled her eyes, and she did what she was instructed. Vernon circled her like a shark, his hand stroking his neatly trimmed mustache. She insisted that she felt fine, but his eyes never left her body. After an uncomfortable minute had passed, he broke his silence with one of his rather long sounds. If Vernon had a tagline, that would be it. He asked her how long she had felt like this, and she informed him that it had been a few weeks.
"Hey, Meek,"
he shouted out playfully, asking Yumiko to join them. The woman smiled and asked what was going on.
"Stand here, if you would, and look at our girl Steel from this angle."
Yumiko said that she saw a brilliant young woman and had laughed it off at first, but then Vernon whispered something into her ear, and her observation grew more intense. She walked up to Steel, much closer than Vernon, and asked if she can touch her abdomen. Steel was growing more uncomfortable by the second, but she trusted Yumiko a great deal, and she nodded in agreement. Yumiko gently felt around her torso and groped around the rest of her upper body, not in a perverse way, but more in a way that a mother would inspect her child for a mysterious injury. She looked over to Vernon and said, "Well, I'm not a doctor, but I know a mom when I see one." Steele's jaw dropped so low that she half expected sand to get into it.
"My thoughts exactly,"
said Vernon with a wide grin. "No, it can't be," Steele started, her tears pouring out faster than the rains that filled the lake. Panic began to creep into her voice. "What will I tell Les? What if he's not ready? What if I'm not ready?" Yumiko teared up too, and she wrapped Steel in a tight hug, but not too tight. She assured the young woman that everything would be all right, and that they would be there to help her get through this together.
"Oh, come here,"
said Vernon, wrapping his big arms around both of them. Just then, Les rounded the corner, rice in hand, and he froze immediately. A confused sound escaped his lips, and all three peered over to him at once, each with tears in their eyes.
"Oh, there he is,"
Vernon replied with a wave of his giant hand. He walked awkwardly into their little huddle, and he felt Yumiko shove his lower back in, forcing him right up against Steel. Les looked into his wife's watery eyes, and though he had no context as to what was happening, he felt tears creeping into his own. Steel tried to speak. She wanted to explain what had happened and all the emotions she was feeling, how happy she was, but the only word she could manage to say was his name. She repeated it again, and her voice cracked, and only sobs followed. I love you, Les blurted out. He didn't know what else to say, so he went with what he felt most in his heart. Steele's crying increased tenfold when he said that, and she sunk her bobbing head into his chest. Les looked at Vernon and Yumiko for any hint as to what was going on, but the couple just smiled and nodded at him. Seeing Vernon with tears in his eyes hit him hard. The lore keeper had begun to feel like a father to him. He was a mountain of a man whose body aged like stone. Les couldn't imagine what might have made his tough exterior crack. After a few heartbeats, Steele looked up into her husband's eyes and smiled. "Say it again," she demanded. "Say what?" Les asked, feigning ignorance. Steele playfully punched him in his chest. "You know what." Les smiled just as wide as her, and he confessed his love for her again, and then again, and one additional time, just for good measure. Steele laughed. Then she looked deep into his eyes and said, "Les, we're having a baby." "A baby?" he gasped, feeling like he was just struck in the solar plexus by Master Carter. Steele's face tightened, and she kept nodding, never breaking their eye contact. We're having a baby," Les roared happily, and now his face was looking a lot like hers. They shared a long kiss, and he lifted her in the air, and she laughingly reminded him to be careful.
Aw, look at these kids.
Vernon shouted cheerfully at Yumiko. The couples all shared a big family hug then.
This means we're gonna be grandparents then.
They all laughed and cried and celebrated together. It wasn't the normal life Les had imagined before, but it was a better one than he could ever have dreamed of. For the next week, life had been nearly perfect. The group worked diligently at terraforming the region, and they took advantage of every resource they could. Vernon and Yumiko got engaged, and Les and Steele excitedly planned out their life and debated baby names. Though things were good, the young couple still had some minor problems. Ever since Steele had told him she was pregnant, he tried to do everything for her. He would stop whatever he was doing to make sure he helped her with the simplest of tasks, and refused to let her wander outside of the settlement alone. When she confided in Yumiko and Vernon about this, they had differing opinions. Yumiko stated that it was Les's fatherly instincts kicking in, and that she should just be thankful. But Vernon argued that Steele was still strong and capable, and that the boy was being overprotective, though his intentions were pure. He assured the ladies that he would take care of it, and over the next few days, he spent time with the young man and coached him on how to be protective but not overbearing. Les wanted to argue, but he recognized the wisdom in Vernon's words. He was so afraid of losing everything he loved and cared about again, but the older man reminded him that true love is being able to trust those you give your heart to and know that they can carry their fair share in a relationship. Though he did encourage Les to still keep a more watchful eye from afar, just in case there was a medical emergency or something in need. And on day 80, such an emergency occurred. Once when Steele had been deconstructing chunks of spacecraft on her own, she didn't notice that she was being stalked by a beast. Les noticed, of course, since he had been stalking her too, but from far enough away where she didn't notice. Willing to embarrass himself for the sake of his wife, the young man raced into action. Steele saw him running up to her from behind some sand, and she began to protest, but then she heard an ear-shattering roar, and her blood ran cold. A large male lion charged at her from the south, but Les threw himself between them, axe in hand. In that moment, time seemed to move in slow motion for her, the adrenaline coursing through her body, her husband and baby in danger. She wasn't afraid of the lion, she was afraid for them. Steele fired 3 shots in rapid succession, all 3 hitting their target. The injured lion charged into Les, and he chopped into it with his axe. The pair fought in perfect harmony, with Les holding the beast at bay, while Steele fired around him as he dodged. She landed all of her shots, and the lion quickly fell. The couple faced each other, and each could see in the other's eyes that they were considering starting an argument about which of them was in the wrong. Without saying a word, they moved past their petty squabble immediately and hugged. Sadly, due to a lack of training, Luna Furiosa had returned to the wild. They decided to leave some kibble outside, hoping that she would stick to just eating that, but they knew if she turned on them, they would have to put her down. And that thought seemed to hurt Vernon more than any wound really could. Another extortion attempt came in, this time from the squids of Cash. someone named Aranka the Strong. Les refused to negotiate with them, of course, and he suspected that they would send another weak raid in a few days' time. However, he was very wrong. A gang of re-scrappers showed up early the next morning. They were a balanced team of fighters and possessed some heavy-duty armor. Seeing the attackers approaching, Les put on the tainted armor he looted weeks back, and he and the others went outside to confront the attackers head-on. They attacked from behind the cover of the Drago trees, but their opponents started gaining an advantage. Les rushed out, and Yumiko tried to go with him, but she was shot several times as soon as she left cover. Les continued battling against Mitch, their best fighter, and eventually, the remaining colonists were able to defeat him. Aranka the Strong tried to flee after her friends had fallen, but she was stopped and beat down. The bloodshed jolted something within Luna Furiosa, and their once loyal friend began hunting Imp. Yumiko and Burnin rushed to the iguana's aid, and despite his best efforts trying to snap Luna out of it, Burnin couldn't seem to get through, and they were forced to put down their old friend. It was a sad day for the group. After the initial chaos, Burnin tended to Yumiko and Imp, while Les captured the two raiders, Mitch and Aranka, and patched them up. The silly was far too gone to be saved, and Les stripped him of his clothing and put an end to all of his wailing. As payback for injuring Yumiko, Burnin force-fed Mitch some kibble and yelled at him, and no one seemed to object, not even his fellow prisoner. Aranka caught a disease, and when Burnin refused to help her, Les did what he could to mend it. The group was torn on what to do with their new prisoners. Burnin suggested that they execute them, but the others didn't agree, not even Yumiko, who was badly hurt by them. Aranka was on the brink of death thanks to her infection, and Burnin used healing her as bait to get out as many secrets as he could. Through their interrogations, they learned that the Squids of Cash had a recent change in leadership. He learned that a dangerous warrior named Sandslasher had mutinied against the previous leader. Now, they were expanding their operations all across the region. Even the muggers were trying their best to stay clear of them. And there was a new disturbing detail that they learned, one that stood above all the others. The Squids of Cash had recently begun extorting towns, or taking them over completely, one of them being Rustburg. Les chewed on that last bit of intel for several days. He tried to push it out of his mind the best he could. Why should he care about that town? It wasn't his home anymore. Those people abandoned him, so why wouldn't he return the favor? Any friends that he had there had grown up and moved on, or sadly, they had died in the plague, like Master Carter. And even if he wanted to help them, he had no idea how to even get back to Rustburg. Sure, he knew the general direction, but it was a big desert. He had friends and family to look after now, and they were here. He couldn't just leave to save people that he used to beg for scraps. People who used to demonize him for just trying to survive. Nearly a week had passed, and he continued to fight back the guilt that was tearing at his mind. He did his best to focus on the desert and his family. He planted palm trees with Burnin and helped the group fend off a pack of man-hunting boombats. Ah, poor little guys. Some camels had wandered in, giving them a perfect chance to tame some caravan animals. One of them went mad and chased Imp across the lake. Burnin was able to take it down. He was getting really good with animals, and he eventually tamed that one, and he tamed another one as well. More meteors fell, and more plants grew. The lake had promoted rapid growth throughout the land, and over the past several months the soil had shifted and begun changing the very ecosystem itself. Soft sand gave way to nutrient-rich soil, and seeds from bird droppings turned into seedlings and saplings. The dormant giant of a lake, Lake Les as Burnin jokingly called it, was fully awake. On day 90, that guilt, that pit in his stomach, continued to haunt Les more and more. His thoughts were back on his hometown. He told Steele about it, and she agreed he didn't owe the town anything, and that even if he wanted to help, there was nothing he or his group can do against a whole town full of bandits. Les tentatively agreed, but that night, Mitch tried to escape, and Les caught him before he could. The men fought brutally, and Les bested him yet again. This time, he threatened Mitch for information and promised to end his life if he didn't tell him everything about Sandslasher and the bandits in Rustburg. The man laughed, even while a boot was pressing down on his throat. He explained that the mayor in Rustburg was part of the gang for years, and they took it over without a single shot being fired. Les asked about the fate of the residents there, and he was told that they would either be killed, sold into slavery, or if they were lucky, they would eventually be assimilated with the gang. He wanted to crush the arrogant man's throat, but Steele rushed in to repair the door after hearing what happened, and seeing her stole the demon out of him. He tried again to sleep that night, but when he did, he thought of Master Carter and his fellow students, about all he had learned and had gone through. He thought about what he would say to his child when they were one day old enough to ask where he had come from and what that was like. Would he be able to answer that question truthfully or with any sort of pride? What about the kids like him, the ones right now in the hands of some bandits, separated from their parents? He couldn't decide which was worse, losing your family to a disease or being forcefully taken from them. All of it stirred in his mind, a big soup of emotions, and his head was the bowl. He snuck out of bed and went back into the holding cell and forced Mitch to give him the coordinates for Rustburg. Les crept back into the dorm and gave Steele one last kiss on the forehead. He went into the barn and put a saddle on Humps, one of their new camels, and if the coordinates were true, he estimated it would be about a 3-day ride to Rustburg. Les and Humps went out into the night. His mind shouted at him to just go back inside. It would be just so easy. Everything would just be normal. But in his heart, he knew that he would never make peace with the fact that he let all those people get taken by bandits. He then patted Humps on the neck, and they headed off deeper into the desert. A few days later in the afternoon, Les had arrived back in his hometown of Rustburg. He saw the telltale signs of an old, dirty road, one that had been kept low by the countless carts that passed over it. Along the horizon, he saw several wooden buildings and a couple of windmills popping up. He crept as close as he could and left Humps in the shade near some cactus so he wouldn't go hungry, and hid behind a cactus of his own, observing everyone and everything. He studied the town for a long time. He watched a few bandits pulling security patrols, walking lazily along the outskirts of town. Some of the bandits were wearing plate armor like his. It would seem that those that were wearing the plate armor must have been higher ranking than those without. Many others who were seen hanging around these armored people were wearing bandoliers of different colors. He wouldn't be able to pull this off on his own, more than likely. From his best estimate, there was at least 20 bandits. He would have to try to find allies in here. Surely, someone, somewhere, must have some fight left in them. He waited patiently for dark to arrive. Then he snuck over to another nearby cactus, and he waited for a patrol to pass by, and then crept behind them. He learned throughout his day of observation that the armory was in the center of town, and that's where he went first, to try to secure himself a better weapon. He crept around as silently as he could, sticking to the deep shadows created by the cascading moonlight. Whenever a passerby came too close, he did the best he could to hide behind an object or in a deep, dark corner. Nobody seemed to have noticed him, or if they did, they didn't think anything of him. He was wearing the armor of one of their top bandits after all. The armory door was locked, of course. That's what he expected. But then he tried one of the windows, and to his surprise, it was open. Not one to question good luck, Les slipped inside the window, and he made sure to lock it himself. He had time to browse the various weapons that were lined up against the wall. There were many different options, everything ranging from hatchets, to swords, to spears, to breach axes, but one weapon above all caught his eye. A legendary mono sword. He couldn't believe his luck, and at first he thought it was a fake, but after giving it a few test swings, and even testing the sharpness of the blade by rubbing his fingers lightly over it, he knew the sword was for real. But just as he equipped the weapon, he saw a shadow pass by one of the windows. Somebody was beginning to turn the knob on the armory, and when they realized it was locked, he heard a dangling of keys on the outside. He found the deepest shadow he could near the door and crouched down within it. A red-eyed woman entered the room. She stalked the weapon cabinet and seemed to have been looking for something in particular. Les didn't give her the chance to find the weapon she desired. He crouched as low as he could and snuck behind the woman without making a sound. He could hear her muttering to herself under her breath. She seemed to be agitated, fearful even. He held his sharp blade up against the back of her neck and threatened her that if she had made a sound, he would take off her head. The woman seemed more amused than anything. He ordered her to drop her weapon and to take off her armor, and she did so. Then he told her to turn around, and when she did, both of their expressions changed. "Less?" the woman said, jarring him from his angry scowl. His face softened. "Ramona?" They both gave each other a slight smile. She was a friend from school, someone that had actually been kind to him while he was homeless. She had often tried to give him rations and other things, but before she could, they'd always be snatched back by her parents. When Les questioned her about what was going on and why she was wearing armor, she explained that she did what she needed to survive. She said that they had taken over the town about a week or so ago and were forcing them to do labor. She was one of the few people who were selected to do research on some new type of weapon. She hated these bandits, but considered herself lucky enough to have earned a spot with their gang. That way, she wasn't a victim of their harassment, but she was angry and wanted revenge. For about an hour, they spoke in quiet and devised a plan. She had no love for these bandits and wanted to save her people. She knew of some people who were still willing to fight. They were just people that needed a leader to help show them that they were strong enough to overcome these monsters that have entered their town. She gave Les a helmet to help disguise himself amongst the others, and explained how they always went down to the Rusty Nail for a good cold drink and a game of poker. It was an old corner bar in the middle of town, the most popular place in all of Rustburg. It was the place where his mother and father had met, and if the stories are true, the same place where he was conceived. They fleshed out their plan more as the night went on. They would get Sand Slasher and all of the major players of the bandits for a poker tournament, one that she would set up. Les would disguise himself as a chef and would taint the food that they would eat. That's when her and the rest of the resistance fighters would break into the room and end this invasion once and for all. They set a time for the following night. That's when he would begin cooking the special meals. With a plan in place, they shook hands and even hugged. By the time their meeting concluded, the sun was beginning to peak above the horizon. Les was exhausted, but he was too nervous to try to sleep in any of the other common lounges that the bandits had shared. So he snuck off into the back streets of Rustburg to a place that he used to visit quite frequently not too long ago. It was old Roberto's shed. He didn't know where the old man was, or if the old man was even still around. But the shed seemed abandoned all the same, just as it always was. He crept inside and dusted off the debris and spider eggs that had made themselves home atop it. And then he closed the door and laid on top of the old cot and fell into a deep slumber. Les awoke and he ate some food and he played some games. Before long, the brilliant pinks and oranges of sunset were dominating the horizon. It was Les's favorite part of the day. Even when he was sleeping in the streets, he always looked forward to it. He loved the way the dark silhouettes of the buildings contrasted against the waves of color in the background. Something about the odd mix always made him feel at peace. He ventured into his old dojo when no one was looking. Despite all that had happened to the town, the building remained largely unaffected. He looked around the room and saw a new mural on the wall. It was one of Master Carter in a calm, meditative stance with a quote that read, "A warrior's strength comes not from the battles they win, but from the losses they endure with an unbreakable spirit." Les bowed before walking onto the dojo floor, and he moved slowly across till reaching the far wall. He bowed again in respect, this time towards Master Carter's mural. He stood there for a while and talked about many things. He told the painting about the pain and loss he suffered, about his desert adventure and the new life he had made for himself. He admitted to being scared. He was afraid of Sand Slasher and his gang of bandits. He was afraid for his family and the townsfolk and what might happen to them if he failed. But more than anything, he was terrified about failing as a father. He knew nothing about children and next to nothing about life. What type of example would he be to his child? The room was deadly silent, and even the outside noise had ceased altogether. And though he could hear nothing, he felt an inner peace wrap itself around him like a protective cloak. All this time, life had been preparing him for this very moment. The suffering, the pain, the happiness, and joy. Everything he experienced in this forge called life was hammered into the blade that he has now become. Les took a deep breath and whispered, "I know who I am. I know what I'm capable of. I'm ready." He lowered himself to his knees and unsheathed his new legendary sword. He held it out horizontally in both hands and bowed. "Master, guide my hand." The night was loud with obnoxious laughter and the clinking of glasses. A thick, pungent smoke hung in the air, a combination between smoke leaf and tobacco. The cloudy atmosphere gave everyone a little buzz. Even Les was beginning to feel a little bit lighter. The Rusty Nail was packed, tables full of bandits betting, drinking, and celebrating their new glorious life in the middle of Rustburg. They played darts, cards, and some game using a knife where you stab down in between your fingers. Les stood behind the bar, observing it all, serving food and drink whenever needed. But beneath his disguise, he was itching to take action, and also just itching beneath the plate armor, which had grown quite uncomfortable with a day full of sweating. Les looked around from patron to patron, trying to figure out which one of these bandits were the leader, Sandslasher. None of them looked distinct enough to stand out, and he figured a man with such reputation would surely have some kind of unique feature. The saloon's double doors swung open with a loud creak, and a great hush fell over the room. An orange impid wearing slim-fitting silver and black armor strolled into the room. His polished black boots and oversized spurs knocked loudly against the dusty wooden floor, and he wore no headgear, which allowed his yellow faux hawk and polished horns to shine that much brighter. Les knew right away that this was him. This was Sandslasher. The bandits howled happily and raised their drinks in respect towards their leader. Sandslasher wore a crooked grin and patted and clapped a few of them on the back as he passed by. His cocky demeanor reminded Les of the popular guys back in school, the type that all the girls adored. He grabbed a drink and strolled about the crowd, shaking hands and listening to stories. Les did his best to blend in, and he fooled more than one suspicious bandit during the night. He was invited to play a hand of cards. He knew if he declined, it would draw more suspicion upon him, so he cheerfully agreed. While they played, he studied the leader whenever possible. The man liked to drink, that much was obvious, but he always took drinks off of his closest allies and never ordered one himself, and he never even glanced at the food. To Les's surprise, the impid walked over to the piano. A couple of bandits who had been poorly attempting to play shrank away as he approached, each of them nodding their heads in respect. He invited one of them to stay and instructed them on which key to press and when. Then Sandslasher cracked his knuckles and began playing an oddly beautiful tune. And for a time, that's how it went, eating and drinking, gambling and fighting. It seemed like every bandit in town had joined the poker party, and this was exactly what Les was hoping for. Ramona crept through the dark streets and began gathering as many townsfolk as she could trust. She explained to them that Les had returned to save them, that he had grown into a fierce warrior in the wilds, and would help break them free of the bandits. They made their way to the armory and gathered what weapons they could for their assaults. Most of them weren't skilled fighters, and some of them weren't fighters at all, but they were all willing to die for their freedom. Ramona crept into the kitchen with a small crew, while another large group had surrounded the front entrance. Ramona peeked through the kitchen door and into the smoky saloon, holding up her hand, waiting for the right moment to strike. Even through the smoke, Les could see that many of the patrons looked rather uncomfortable. One of them stood up abruptly and vomited all over the floor. Someone joked about them not being able to hold their liquor, and the saloon erupted in laughter. Even Sandslasher chuckled. But then another one threw up violently on the pool table, and a few others quickly followed. "We've been poisoned!" one of the ill men cried between heavy, wet gasps. Sandslasher jumped to his feet and drew the beautiful blade from his hip. He ordered his crew, the ones that weren't sick, to hunt down the cooks and bring them to him. But then the kitchen door burst forth, and Ramona's makeshift militia poured into the room. As soon as the chaos erupted, Les launched himself into action and drew his sword. He slashed it out at the nearest raider and sent a spray of blood across the table. The weakened raiders were still very dangerous. Many of the townsfolk fell right away. Les frantically looked around the bar and watched as Sandslasher was cutting a bloody path through the militia. He shouted the bandit's name, and the man whipped around and growled like a demon. They charged at one another and collided in the center of the fray, their swords ringing out above the violent shouting. Sandslasher pressed the attack, trying to overwhelm his foe. Many people would have been consumed by such a ferocious offense, but Les parried many of the attacks perfectly, and the few that got through hit only his plate armor. He landed a few powerful slashes against his opponent and was beginning to gain the advantage, but then a powerful punch erupted in his side. A random bullet had caught him by surprise. Thankfully, the armor had stopped it, but it still knocked the wind out of him. Seeing his current situation, Sandslasher took the opportunity and began to flee. Les started after him, but the bandit leader took a deep breath and whipped around. Everyone dove for cover as Sandslasher blew a cone of fire out across the saloon, and the flames seemed not to care which side they set ablaze. Screams and smoke filled the air, and the epic battle poured out into the street. Les charged after the leader, slashing the arm off another bandit as they tried to grab him. He chased the impet into the crowded street, and they fought amidst the chaotic gunfire. Wild-looking bandit swinging a large hammer tried to crush Les's head, but he ducked at the last second and slashed the man across the belly. His legendary sword wasn't satisfied enough with just gutting the man. The amazing blade was so sharp that it cut clean through his body, and the man slowly fell in half to the ground. Les screamed down the street, trying to warn one of the resistance fighters, but Sandslasher was too quick, and the leader slashed off their head. He then turned and smiled at Les. He took off again in the opposite direction. Les chased after him and was quickly closing the distance, and then he followed the impet into another building. He was so tunnel-visioned that he hadn't even realized what building he ran into. He stopped himself short before stepping into the dojo. Sandslasher was already in there, staring at the mural of Master Carter. Les bowed quickly before entering and slowly walked toward the man.
I heard there was some newcomer in town, Sandslasher said, not caring enough to even look at him. I heard too, this stranger had visited Master Carter's dojo.
How do you... Les started to ask, but then the impet reached for the mural.
Don't you dare,
he growled.
Oh, I see. So he meant a lot to you as well.
Les was about to attack him, but he hesitated. You knew Master Carter?
Knew him, Sandslasher laughed. I knew him better than any of you.
He reached out and lightly touched the painting. He chuckled some more, and Les could tell that he was thinking of an old memory.
Let's just say we're cut from the same cloth.
You have no idea who he was. Either that, or you're the worst student he ever had. That accusation provoked some anger from the bandit, and his narrowed eyes slowly turned and peered into Les. The young man gave an audible gulp and brought his sword up at the ready.
Student? He asked in a low, menacing voice. I taught him everything he knows.
1,000 questions raced through Les's mind in that moment. Was this criminal really Master Carter's sensei? Was Master truly capable of being in the same room as this horrible man? Then why are you doing this?
Well, let's just say your precious master wasn't the aw shucks kind of guy you remember him as. And he also owes me a great debt. And just so happens this town here is the first payment.
It's pointless. He's already dead.
Is that so?
Sandslasher's crooked grin expanded into a wide, toothy smile.
Well, ain't that funny? And here I was thinking you knew all about Duskblade.
Duskblade?
Listen, kid, I ain't got time for storytelling. Now leave here and never come back. We could forget this little exchange ever happened.
No, these people are innocent. You and your gang need to leave, or I'll kill you all.
Last chance, kid. Now, get out.
The bandit roared the last sentence, and his eyes flashed brightly for just a heartbeat. That growl, those flashing eyes, the horrible presence of dread. Les felt himself turning for the door. He seemed to have no control over his body, but then he stopped and resisted the invisible pull and turned his body back as if he was fighting against a roaring tide.
I won't go. Ah, hell, kid. Why didn't you just listen? Now I really do have to kill you.
The bandit walked forward, and Les fully gained control of his body and charged towards him. The impet's smile turned smoldering red, and Les knew what that meant. A burst of flame sprayed out from the man's mouth, and he was able to turn his body just in time, barely avoiding the blaze. He charged in again and chased his opponent around the punching bags. Sandslasher teased him the entire time and continued to poke at the gaps in his armor with his fine blade. Frustrated, Les slashed across and cut one of the punching bags in half, covering the area in a cloud of sand. The sand got into the bandit's eyes, and Les pressed the attack. He was able to score a deep cut across the bandit's torso and perfectly set him up for a follow-up slash, one that would surely be fatal. But just before the blade connected, the man simply disappeared, and the sword sliced nothing but air. Before he can even begin to question what happened, the man reappeared near the back doors. Somehow, he managed to teleport there. Les ran into the room after him. But then, a burning pinch erupted in his back just as he entered, and he swung around to find Sandslasher standing there, bloody sword in hand. Les tried to attack, but his legs betrayed him, and he leaned against the wall to stop himself from falling. The bandit examined the bloodied weapon and made a disapproving tisk sound.
It's a shame, really. You had the chance to walk away. You could have went back home to wherever or whomever you came from.
Those last words stung more than the wound in his back. Using a poisoned weapon? I didn't take you for being a coward.
And I mistaken you for being smarter.
Sandslasher finished his rebuttal by licking the blood off of his blade.
Make peace with your maker,
The bandit taunted, and he walked forward. Les saw every moment of his life flash before his eyes. His parents, his struggles, his loved ones. All of it played out like some type of story on a screen. The tale of Ulysses S. Kant. But then, that screen went black. It was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then he began to hear a distant drum banging somewhere out in the void. A tiny bright light appeared in the distance. Am I dead? He asked himself. Did it already happen? Whenever he blinked, the light grew closer and the drumming louder. It continued this way until the bright light and thumping had fully encompassed him. It was blinding at first, but his vision adjusted and he found himself in the middle of an empty room. No, not a room. This place was something more complex than that. Much more. He was floating in a completely blank space, a place where both nothing and everything existed in harmony, as it always had and will. A place where whatever he perceived as truth was his only reality. This was his internal desert, the eternal well of all that he was and is becoming. A small object floated into his sight. It was the source of the drumming sound, a little seed that had been beating forever. He carefully cradled the seed in his hands. Each pulse of energy the seed emitted jolted him with overwhelming waves of emotion, and every emotion was buried in by an underlying layer of love. Holding the seed felt akin to being hugged by some great internal spirit, some being that was the pure essence of him. He imagined that the seed was nestled into a safe, nurtured patch of soil, and so it was. Then he looked up and closed his eyes, and imagined how nice the rain felt when he was in the desert. And there it was. He could feel droplets of cool rain bouncing along his face, and they slid down his cheeks along with his tears. When he opened his eyes again, the seed had grown into a sapling. He bent in for a closer look. Inside the sapling was a bright little bulb. He couldn't quite make out what it was, so he blinked to clear the tears from his eyes. Now, the tree was bigger, and the bulb was the size of his hand, and it had taken the distinctive shape of a little baby attached to its mother tree. Is that me? He touched the sapling and felt the warm presence of his wife, Steel, and her scent filled the room. He closed his eyes again as tears of pure joy rained down with every sob. He forced his eyes back open excitedly, wanting to look upon their baby. But now, the tree had grown taller than even him, and it had taken the shape of Steel. Wait, where's the... Les asked in panic, noticing that Steel was no longer swollen with their baby. That's when he noticed a new seedling sprouting from the ground near her. Les dropped down and brought his face as close as he could to the plant. Steel, look, it's our baby. He blinked away, this time on purpose, wanting to see what their child looked like. But then, the trees were gone. He frantically looked around. The blank space had been filled with grass, and he realized that he was now in the middle of a forest. Confused, he looked up and saw that each tree had a carved face upon it. Mom? He ran up to a tree that had his mother's face in shape and wrapped her in a tight hug. He couldn't tell for sure, but he felt her spirit hugging him back. Dad? He blurted right after, seeing the tree of his father nearby. He blinked again, this time by accident. When he opened his eyes, everything had changed. He was hugging a dead tree, covered in mold and stinging insects. Les jumped back and gasped. The entire forest was rotted and dead. What?
There you are, boy. I've been looking for you,
Sandslasher teased as he stepped out from behind one of the rotted trees.
You had me worried sick, Thought I lost you forever.
How are you doing this?
Well, son, when you're cut with a blade that's covered in psychoid, you're bound to see something crazy. But that's enough explaining things. Now, where were we?
The imp had finished the question by charging forward. Les began a charge of his own, but this time he had a plan. As expected, his enemy teleported again as he drew near, and Les quickly spun around and thrust his sword forward. Sandslasher materialized in front of him. The bandit screamed, or tried to, but in the split second that his new form took shape, the entire blade had been driven into his chest. The forest they were in snapped away in an instant, and now they were standing in the back of the burning dojo once again. Sandslasher tried to back away, but Les held the blade tight and even began lifting the man into the air. The combatants roared in each other's faces, one out of hatred and the other pure determination. Suddenly, Sandslasher launched his head forward. Les thought it was a headbutt attempt and he turned his face to the side, but this was his biggest mistake. The imp had bit down into Les's exposed neck, and a spray of blood splashed against the wall. Momentarily stunned by the surprise attack, Les tried to move, but his muscles wouldn't obey. Instead of ripping into him more, the man began sucking on his neck like a giant mosquito. Les finally managed to let go of his sword, and both men crumbled to the ground. Instead of going for his weapon, Sandslasher went again for Les's neck, growling like a feral beast. Les held the man's snapping mouth at bay with one hand and reached for his sword with the other. The bandit pushed harder and nearly latched onto him again. With one last shout of defiance, one last shout of pure, visceral survival, Les shoved the man off and grabbed his blade and slashed off the bandit's arms as he dove back in. Sandslasher howled in pain and collapsed to the ground.
Oh, now you done pissed me off, boy.
Les went for the killing blow, but a piece of fiery debris broke down upon them, and he barely managed to jump out of the way. They were now separated by the burning rubble, and Sandslasher burst out in laughter.
What's it gonna be, son? You willing to die with me?
He could already feeling himself growing lightheaded. He straightened himself proudly and thought back at all the lessons he had learned. Everything that had built to this very moment. It seems that you're right where you're supposed to be. Les turned away and started for the door.
Oh, come on, we was just having fun. Don't you want to know who your Master Carter really is?
Les turned back around and stared at the bandit. The debris was beginning to swallow him with smoke, and he could see fire beginning to creep onto his body. I know who he was, and he was nothing like you. He slashed his sword into a nearby wall and attacked it with all his might. A minute later, he was lying on the ground outside, with a carved-out chunk of Master Carter's mural lying next to him. You did it, Les heard someone say. He opened his eyes and saw the blurry form of Ramona standing over him. She commented on how he looked like he just saw a ghost, and then his world went black. A few days later, he awoke in his old home. It had been converted into some sort of temporary triage of sorts. His wounds had been patched up, and he was glad to see so many townsfolk healing as well. It was poetic in a way. The last time he was in this place, he had lost everything. But now, it just felt like nothing more than a cramped building. Ramona explained that most of the bandits were slain or fled, and those that were caught were thrown in jail and were awaiting trial. When he asked about the dojo and Sandslasher, she explained that the building was lost in the fire, but only his half-melted armor was found in the rubble. But she believed that there was no way he would be able to survive those flames, and more than likely his body burnt up into ash. He hoped that she was right. The townsfolk thanked him and offered him many gifts, all which he of course declined. Ramona offered him a position as sheriff, but he explained that he had his own settlement to look after now, but added that she would make a finer sheriff than he could ever hope to be. They walked through the town together, and she showed him that they framed and mounted the mural of Master Carter outside of the town hall, a fitting place for such a wise man to be seen. Then they said their goodbyes and made plans to start a trading route when the town was back up and running. The mid-morning sun was just finishing its ascent as Les began making his way out of town. He turned and looked back one more time at his past, and there, standing across from him, was himself. It was his child and teenage self, both smiling peacefully. He nodded toward them, and they disappeared into bits of sand being carried off by the wind. He later found Humps hanging out near where he had left him. The camel had broken free from his rope,
but he stuck around anyway, feasting on all the cacti. They started back home, and about an hour into the trek, his codec had finally gained service, and it crackled to life immediately. Steele's voice came through in a mixture of fear and anger. "Les, are you okay? Answer me, damn it." "Steele," he replied with a smile. "I'm coming home." 3 days later, the shimmering lake of the Barren Bay Basin came into sight. He radioed in and informed them of his arrival. Steele charged him. She shoved him in the chest a few times and scolded him briefly before embracing him in relief. Vernon and Yumiko surrounded them in a hug, and each took a turn threatening Les to never do that again. Over a week later, on the 100th day since Les had started his desert adventure, Steele wailed in agony. She was in labor, and he was there by her side, helping her through it the entire time. He would say reassuring things to try to calm her, and she would reply with insults and curses. They remained there for a majority of the day, and finally, Vernon announced that the baby was on its way. With one final push, the baby was out. It didn't make any sound at first, and Les felt his heart sink into the pit of his stomach. Vernon remained calm, however, and gently tapped the baby on the back. It let out a beautiful, shrieking cry. "There you go, little one. There you go," the big man said, his eyes just as watery as everyone else's. "A beautiful baby girl." He handed her to Les, and Les brought her immediately over to Steele and laid their daughter on her chest. Steele weakly looked up, barely conscious. "Here she is," he said, helping her hold the baby. He kissed Steele on the forehead and whispered, "Thank you." An hour later, they were gently speaking as the baby fed, and finally they agreed on a name. Their baby girl would forever be known as Silver S. Cant. When you lose everything and you fall into the very bottom of your life, remind yourself to smile, for your story is not finished. You're not at the end of your life, but merely at the end of a chapter. You may not have the thing you want right now, but you can still fantasize about having it. It's much better than constantly reminding yourself that it isn't here yet. A lot can happen in just 100 days. Les started with absolutely nothing, and just a year and a half later, he has the life he always dreamed of. The answer was lying dormant inside of him the entire time. He just needed to quiet his mind long enough to hear it. Now, quiet your mind and ask yourself, what do you want? The answer is there inside of you, an instinctual path that exists within you, a path that will help you obtain the very thing you desire most. And the best part is, you don't need to get lost in a desert to find it. Follow your heart, and you'll be there before you know it. Good luck, my friends. Huh? What was that noise? Huh. Must have been my imagination. You guys, thank you. Really, I didn't know I meant this much to you. I guess in a way, I'm just like Les. I felt like nobody needed me, until others made me realize I'm the one they needed most. This new perspective on life has really lifted a weight off my shoulders. It's given me a whole new lens in which to view the world. This harbor might be run down and empty, but that's only its current state. This place is loaded with potential. I could see it now. People playing in the streets, businesses bustling with customers. Lore's Harbor, a sinner's paradise. Wait, what? Oh, you don't like that, huh? Yeah, you guys are right. We'll have to work on that. Either way, this community will continue to grow better, together. And it's all thanks to awesome viewers like yourself. So, I propose a toast to Rambler Uno, the legendary supporter, and all of you fine folks as well. And until next time, my friends, take care.